Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Protection of Children, Digital Safety and Data Protection Bill.
Now.
Josh MacAlister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. I began my career as a teacher. I first entered the classroom in 2009. At the time, we were just beginning to see the use of smartphones amongst teenagers. There was the odd phone in the classroom, the odd instance of a child being bullied through their device. Neither I nor any other teacher at the time could have imagined the impact these devices would come to play in childhood. Speaking to children and parents today, it is clear that children's excessive screen time and unhealthy social media use is fueling family disputes, childhood unhappiness, and parental concern the length and breadth of our country. This problem is growing. Voices of concern are getting louder, and I believe it is now time to act. Today, the average 12-year-old spends 21 hours a week on their smartphone. That's the equivalent of 4 full days of school teaching per week. 93% of 12 to 15-year-olds are active social media users. 76% of teenagers spend most of their free time on their screens. This is a fundamental rewiring of childhood itself, and it has happened in little over a decade. Children are spending less time outside, less time reading, less time exercising, exploring, meeting people, communicating in person, all the things that make childhood special and the things that are necessary for healthy childhood development. Instead, many of our children now spend their time captured by addictive social media and smartphone use, often sat alone, doom scrolling, being bombarded by unrealistic representations of life, communicating through asynchronous large group chats rather than through looking at facial expressions, eye contact, body language, learning to interact, moving less, smiling less, learning less, growing increasingly anxious and depressed. This rewiring of childhood has only one winner: the balance sheets of social media companies. Their business models, the very essence of their business, is built around monetising attention. As their understanding of our consumer habits and technology improves, the encroachment on childhood is set to get worse and worse. What has been the impact of this transformation on childhood? The use of smartphones and social media has grown in parallel with a sharp increase in depression and anxiety amongst teenagers. The trend has been reflected around the world, and the trend lines everywhere have tightly followed one another. Greater time spent on social media and smartphones has run along in parallel with higher rates of anxiety and depression. What are the credible explanations for this worldwide explosion and phenomenon in adolescent mental health problems, if not social media and smartphone use? I'm sure that nobody here needs me to highlight the crisis faced by child and adolescent mental health services. Our NHS is desperate for any action that might help to address this. The threat posed to our children by excessive screen time is not limited, though, just to their mental health. There is increasing evidence of a strong association between screen time and childhood obesity. Smartphone use also affects sleep. Children are 79% more likely to sleep less than the recommended 8 hours if they use their phone. 45% of teenagers, nearly half, stay awake beyond midnight most weeks. This, of course, also has an effect on learning. 4 in 10 teenagers admit their smartphone is distracting them in school and from their grades that they could achieve. For some children, the ubiquitous use of smartphones has forced them into a world of round-the-clock, inescapable bullying and abuse. Over 73% of girls and young women have experienced online harm in the last year. NSPCC has reported an 82% rise in childhood online grooming crimes in the last 5 years, and Ofsted found that 90% of girls and nearly half of all boys have been sent explicit pictures or videos. This bombardment on childhood has not gone unnoticed outside of this building. Across the country, the number of incredible campaigners who have built huge communities calling for change have directly led to this debate here today. That's why I need to take a moment to thank all of those who have contributed in some way to the development of this bill and this debate, many of whom are here in the public gallery today. Firstly, I must reserve my biggest thanks to Ben Kingsley of Safe Screens and Joe and Daisy Ryrie and everyone else at Smartphone Free Childhood. I refer members to my register of interests to see the value of the contribution in kind they have made to get us here today, and I'm extremely grateful for all of their hard work and dedication to this cause. Their continued leadership on this issue gives me enormous confidence that laws will ultimately change to tackle these issues. I also put on record my thanks to the tens of thousands of parents who wrote to their MPs via Smartphone Free Childhood, and apologise to the 630 members of this House who got extra emails to respond to in the process. I'll gladly give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I'd like to associate myself with his warm words for Daisy and Joe, both constituents of mine. Does he also recognise the impact that ambition has had and will continue to have long after this debate? Their dedicated work has helped start real and meaningful conversations about smartphone usage in the schools across the UK.
The Honourable Member is absolutely right, and the campaign that they've started will only grow in time. I'll gladly give way to the gentleman.
The Honourable Gentleman, and I agree with the comments he's made so far. But the emails I've received from constituents who support his campaign make references to raising the age of internet adulthood from 13 to 16, to help support the ban on phones in school being brought by MP Josh MacAlister. Now, he will forgive me for saying that nothing he has said so far requires legislation. The bill he's brought today could all be achieved by a minister just deciding to ask the Chief Medical Officer to produce a report or the Minister to produce a plan. What has happened to the legislative action that was clearly in earlier drafts in his legislation and which campaigners so clearly want?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I'll get to that in my speech. Very keen to get onto those points, and I will address the questions he has asked. Smartphone Free as a campaign has grown from 0 members to over 200,000 in less than a year, which shows the strength of feeling out in the country on this issue.
Will my friend give way on that?
Gladly give way.
Point. I think I'd be remiss not to start by thanking him for the leadership he's shown on this issue. He started a big conversation on this topic, not just in this chamber, but right across the country. And that's certainly been true in my Hitchin constituency, where we've got a fantastic local smartphone-free campaign group, but also lots of young people who I see in my school visits, my campaigning conversations across the constituency, who've got real concerns on this topic too. Now, as always, parent and young people's views on these things tend to lead the way. So would he agree with me that, as well as being very ambitious about gathering evidence on this topic, with time we need to get comfortable having that same ambition in legislating with that same precautionary principle we show in every other aspect of children's life to ensure we're protecting them from the harm they are expressing to us currently?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention and completely agree that progress on this issue, I believe, will be inevitable given the strength of feeling in the country on it. I was very grateful for the substantive research document pulled together by Rachel, Tom and the team at Nesta, which demonstrates so clearly why action is needed, and for the polling and focus group research done by New Britain and More in Common, which shows how popular taking action is amongst children themselves as well as parents. Thanks also go to Arabella Skinner and Dr. Becky Foljambe at Health Professionals for Safer Screens and all the health professionals they mobilised to engage with the development of the bill, who are witnessing first-hand the impacts of excessive screen time on the physical and mental health of the nation's children. Our teachers and school leaders are, of course, also in the front line of seeing the impact on children in their care. Particular thanks go to head teacher of the John Wallace Academy, Damian, who organised hundreds of his colleagues in support of the bill, to Teach First and Ambition Institute, all of the schools and academy trust leaders who backed the bill, and to teaching unions, ASCL, NAHT, NASWA, and in particular the NEU, who are leading a big campaign on social media and smartphone use, with a report out just this morning. Children's charities are alive to the detrimental impact of smartphone and social media use on this generation, and I've been delighted to have the backing of the Big Five children's charities, Barnardo's, NSPCC, Action for Children, the National Children's Bureau and the Children's Society. In addition to data and testimony provided by UK Youth on side, the Scouts, Girl Guiding, Quorum and the King's Trust, they have made their mark on this debate. A special mention also goes to the current and former Children's Commissioners for England for their backing. Organisations representing parents have also been vocal about the need for further action, and I record my thanks to Sue and Rhiannon and the wonderful team at Mumsnet for all of their coverage and the debate they have instigated on this topic, and also Parent Zone and Parent Kind for their contributions to the bill hearings. Let me also thank every other member of the public and professionals who came to the bill hearing processes. There's too many to mention, but they have certainly made an impact on members of Parliament who attended. Finally, I want to thank the Five Rights Foundation and members of the Bereaved Families for Online Safety Group, who I met alongside my honourable friend for Darlington. They experienced the most devastating consequences of smartphone and social media use. They have done what so many would find so difficult to do and turned personal tragedy into a campaign for urgent change. Ellen Room, Mariano Janin, Lisa Kenevan, Ruth Moss, Lauren Lefave, Amanda Stevens, Stephen Stewart and Esther Jai for their bravery and for engaging with the development of the bill. Thank you. Yeah. With the problems so stark and the calls for change so loud, what is being done to respond to these issues around the world? Just this week, in the conservative state of Utah, the Republican governor has passed America's first law mandating age verification for app stores in order to ensure children only use apps that are age appropriate, where parents are happy. Australia has legislated for an outright ban of social media below the age of 16 that will come into force later this year. Denmark last week moved to ban mobile phones in schools and after-school clubs. Norway last year has increased the minimum age limit on social media to 15 by changing the age of consent for data sharing. France has done the same and has pushed for measures to be taken across the EU. Will it just be British children that are left unprotected against the addictive harms of smartphones and social media? We cannot let this happen, and we must act. It is time we caught up, and that is why I'm so pleased to be debating this issue today, following months of engagement across government and beyond with hundreds of health and education professionals, children's, youth and online safety charities, parents and young people themselves. I introduced this bill because of the stark difference between the conversations taking place out there in the country and the debates we've had in here in the nation's Parliament. It is fair to say that the public are well ahead of politicians on this issue, and today marks progress towards Parliament finally catching up with the mood of the nation. This bill has been drafted to secure explicit government backing. It's been written to achieve change rather than just highlight the issue. That is why the bill before us is narrower than where I started when this campaign began 6 months ago. But I'm hopeful that the Minister will confirm in his response that the government will be taking forward measures in this bill. What does the bill do? Most importantly, it commits the government to come back within a year with a decision on whether to raise the digital age of consent from 13 to 16. Under GDPR legislation, the standard age of consent was set at 16. However, countries could choose to vary it as low as 13. That's what the UK chose to do at the time. The appropriateness of that decision must now be assessed, given the ways in which social media companies are now using teenagers' data to keep them hooked to their platforms. I'll gladly give way.
Thank you for all the work that the member for Whitehaven and Workington has done on this issue. Can I ask, when that decision was made for the age to be set at 13 rather than 16, what evidence was used? What detailed work was done by decision makers at the time to make sure that it was grounded in evidence and good for children?
Honourable friend, for an important question and point. 13 is the age most countries have landed on as the result of a protracted negotiation in the US Senate about data and online safety many, many years ago. It was not based on evidence. It was based on a compromise at committee in another country. So we really do need to base these decisions on the evidence, and there was no firm evidence for picking 13 over any other age. Alarm bells on this question of data and consent are already ringing. And just this week, the Information Commissioner announced an investigation into how TikTok uses 13 to 17-year-olds' personal information to make recommendations to them. Changing the digital age of consent would give parents more control over who was accessing their children's data, and it would dumb down the powerful algorithms that feed children addictive content. The bill also... I'll gladly give way.
The honourable gentleman, and I congratulate him on this bill and bringing it forward in the way that he has. And I also, I think, congratulate him on becoming a parliamentary private secretary. My question really is, does he support this bill going into committee? Because I think there's a consensus across the House that it should have a second reading. If it doesn't have a second reading, it won't be able to go into committee, and we won't be able to discuss in further detail the points he's making.
I thank the honourable member for making a point. He is, of course, a connoisseur of private members' bills and has been known not to be keen to see many of them make it to committee. So I'm sure he won't mind me gently making the point that I'm here today, as so many members are, to make a difference and make sure the government takes action. The bill also commits the government to instruct the UK Chief Medical Officer to update and reissue guidance for parents and professionals about the impact of excessive screen time and social media use on children. It is nearly 6 years since this guidance was last issued, and we have seen the positive impact of recent guidance elsewhere in places such as America, where the Surgeon General advice has stated more recently social media has not been proven safe. Children and adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media face double the risk of mental health problems, including experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety. This advice led to calls in the US for cigarette packet-style health warnings on social media websites.
Will I give way on that point?
I'll gladly give way and then give way here.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way and for this important bill and the way that he is presenting it. Just this week I met with Michael Hall School in the Education Centre, the A-level students from this school, who were very concerned about the addictive nature of what they are seeing. And they absolutely want to see action. I really applaud him for listening to UK Youth, the Guides and others who feel exactly the same. What they do want is action now, and I say all power to him and ask through him with the government to really push for some change, because a year or 3 months in childhood is a long time for that addiction to grow and not be challenged. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for that point, and completely agree that there's an urgency to this issue, and the strength of feeling out in the country, not just amongst parents but children themselves, shows that we should take action. I'll gladly give way.
I thank Honourable friend for giving way, and I want to put on record my thanks for the national debate he's stimulated in this area, and I think we should all be grateful to him for that. So I did wonder what advice was available already to parents, particularly in Scotland, from the National Health Service there. The NHS Scotland website, I could find no guidance on screen time. My own health board, NHS Lothian, there's guidance for parents with the very youngest of children I could find. Through in Glasgow, Scotland's second city, I have to stress, Madam Deputy Speaker, Glasgow does not even have a castle. The health board there offers guidance dated from 2016, and I think things have moved on since then, have they not? And surely parents deserve to have the very latest guidance when it comes to considering this matter. Thank you.
Thank my honourable friend for making those points. And this is why updated advice from the nation's CMOs is so important, because it can cascade through health systems to give guidance to professionals and to parents. And finally, the bill calls on government to conduct more research and further develop evidence and guidance that is so important for future action. Given how rapidly these devices and services are developing, it is vital that parents and carers are given up-to-date advice on the harm their children might be exposed to. Why has this not been done before? The technology companies that are profiteering off this rewiring of childhood are incredibly effective at casting doubt over any evidence of a link between screen time and negative impacts on children. This is not the first time an industry has fought against a tide of evidence in order to keep peddling their product. In the 1960s, the tobacco industry was lobbying hard against the link between smoking and cancer. In the absence of evidence of a causal link, they cast doubt on the overwhelming correlational evidence available. In the end, the government, our government, acted on the basis of correlational studies using criteria set by the epidemiologist Sir Austin Bradford Hill. The criteria attempts to help policymakers to make decisions when causal studies don't exist. His criteria included, and I quote, that consistent findings observed by different persons in different places with different samples strengthens the likelihood of an effect. So, for example, that students across the Western world began reporting feeling increasingly lonely in school from 2012 is important. Or another criteria, again I quote, that greater exposure should generally lead to greater incidence of the effect, essentially the dose effect. Studies of multiple large data sets, including the UK's own Millennium Cohort study, shows that teenagers who are heavy users of social media are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and other mental health harms. It could take years for evidence of a causal link through scientific studies to be established. In the meantime, our children's mental and physical health degrades, their education continues to be affected, and evidence of a correlation gets stronger and stronger. As lawmakers, we must use tools like the Bradford Hill tests to make the best possible decisions with what we know now. We must act on excessive screen time today in the same way we acted on smoking back then. And like debates that were had on smoking and car seatbelts, it took a process of legislation rather than one big bang event. That's why starting today with these initial steps and then following them through with major action soon will be so important. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn directly to address head-on the arguments made against taking action to curb social media and smartphone use by children. As I see it, there are 5 common arguments against action. First, that there isn't enough evidence to act. Over the last few months, through the number of evidence sessions and engagement with experts that myself and others have had, has shown that that is plainly untrue. And even so, where should the burden of evidence sit? With the parents and campaigners who have noticed the damage being done to their children? With the children themselves who are calling for more support? Or the companies who are selling them products and services designed to be addictive that have completely transformed the nature of their childhood? When it comes to protecting children from harm, a precautionary approach is surely advised. For almost any other product, companies would have to prove that they were safe before selling them to children, rather than being free to sell them as they wish until the evidence of harm becomes overwhelming that something needs to be done. It is instructive that the US Surgeon General advice states that social media has not yet been proved safe. Second is the argument that this is simply the latest in a line of moral panics. People used to fear that watching too much television would turn your eyes square, or that reading novels in the Victorian era would degrade intellect, or that playing violent video games in the 20th century would turn all our children into thugs. But for every example of overblown moral panic, we have many more examples of genuine public health crises that we took too long to address, but eventually were forced to tackle. Research that has come out this morning from More in Common demonstrates that this isn't an issue of Luddite older generations bemoaning shifting social trends. Concerns about social media and smartphone use are dominant in every single generation. Half of Gen Z regret the amount of time they are spending on social media. The third argument I hear is that the genie is out of the bottle and it is too late to do anything now. While phones and social media are undoubtedly here to stay, their harms don't need to be. Regulation can find a way of allowing children to experience the benefits of this technology without being exposed relentlessly to its harms. Just as introducing seatbelt laws saved thousands of lives from road traffic accidents without killing off the car industry, introducing a virtual seatbelt can protect children from excessive screen time. Both action in other countries and our own experience, early though it is, with the Online Safety Act here in the UK, have shown that tech companies are not beyond the power of governments. The fourth argument that tends to come from big tech themselves is that proper age verification is too difficult, age restriction unproven, that the technology doesn't exist or is imperfect. Companies like Yoti and many other age verification platforms show that this is no longer the case. I'm also a technology optimist. The reason this technology is not yet pervasive is insufficient demand. Introduce the regulation and technology will have to catch up, and that is what we will see in Australia later this year. And finally, some suggestions that it is not the government's job to get involved, that this is an issue of parental responsibility. This misses the point that this is a collective action problem. Parents and children alone are not able to establish new shared rules for something that is addictive at a societal level. The reason that smartphones and social media are causing so much stress and conflict in families is because we are giving parents the unenviable choice of either removing devices and ostracising their children or giving into the demands for access and living with the health, sleep and learning consequences. Added to this, not only are parental controls at device, operating and app level confusing and opaque, but our own existing data law gives children as young as 13 the power over their data, which means that they can opt out of these parental controls in year 8 of secondary school. We disempower parents with a problem that is common across society, and then when parents ask for help, we say it's a matter of personal responsibility. I hope today's debate can bury that argument that responsibility for this problem lies with parents struggling with this impossible challenge. Gladly give way.
I just thought you might like to know I'm not going to make any of the arguments that he's arguing that I shouldn't argue.
I welcome the intervention from the Minister, so glad to have boxed off those 5. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are moments when politics falls behind the public mood. The process and traditions of our democratic system make it difficult to keep up with the rapidly evolving world of tech and social media. But this Parliament works best when it is a reflection of the problems and concerns of the people and a chamber for earnest problem solving and action. Over the last few months, I've been encouraged by the sheer volume of support for this bill and this debate. That support comes from across the country, across the ages and across the House. My firm belief that unless we as politicians are able to be the disruptors on this issue and solve it, we will be left being disrupted by it. Acting assertively, together and sooner, will bring benefits to our tech industry, to our public services, for the quality of family life in the UK, and most importantly, to the opportunities for our children. It is for these reasons that I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much indeed. And the honourable gentleman from the far and beautiful North West has made an extremely strong case for the original bill that he envisaged bringing before this House. And I'm afraid, sadly today, I will be speaking not to celebrate progress, but to lament the gutting of what could have been a landmark bill. This government, sadly, like the last, notwithstanding the online safety bill, has dithered, diluted and capitulated. And what remains, I'm afraid, is a hollowed-out gesture and an opportunity missed. As the honourable gentleman has said, the evidence is strong, the damage is profound, and the public support is overwhelming. Documentary after documentary is detailing the significant damage that is being done to our young people on a daily basis. Parent after parent in millions of homes across the land are screaming for help and assistance from the government. As he rightly pointed out, we are allowing smoking for the brain in our youngest of children, with the long-term impact that that will have. But I'm afraid to say that in the face of all that overwhelming evidence and momentum, the honourable gentleman has sadly been done over in bringing forward this bill. Because when you look at what we're presented with, really, as I say, we have nothing more than a gesture. The first point is that the CMO should bring forward guidance. Well, I have to tell the honourable gentleman, I'm sure he knows already, there is plenty of guidance out there already for parents. The NSPCC have online guidance, Internet Matters has online guidance, lots of organisations, including schools themselves, are issuing guidance for parents. In truth, the CMO producing guidance within 12 months will be no more effective than they are. In fact, possibly less. As he pointed out himself, we're dealing with a collective action issue here. You can issue guidance and a small percentage of parents may pick it up and observe it, but if they fall below 20%, then so strong is the peer pressure and so addictive is what we're dealing with that they end up in, as he pointed out himself, screaming matches with their teenage children on a daily basis. By all means.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. But surely he is making an argument for there being a single source of advice to parents right across the United Kingdom by explaining that there's so many fragmented sources of information, no doubt contradictory. Surely what this bill will do will put forward an authoritative guidance set to parents that they can share with their children.
So that will be any more authoritative than the NSPCC or Internet Matters. And as I say, the point I was making is not necessarily that the guidance is going to be pivotal, but that we need to get to a critical mass of observance before guidance is likely to have any impact. And the original bill as proposed, in my view, was likely to do that, not least with the ban in schools, which created a kind of nucleus of clear space for children, which could be translated into homes. And many members may have heard this morning on the BBC a short piece from Fulham Boys School, who have an absolute ban on even bringing a smart home to school. And that ban on the school period has resulted in the period before school and after school also being phone-free, and therefore much more social and beneficial to those pupils. Yes?
Just urge him to be slightly less sceptical about the value of CMO advice. One of the things he knows I've campaigned on for many years is around acquired brain injury. and in particular in relation to concussion or subconcussive events in sport. I think it was actually a very significant change when the British government, under the previous administration, brought forward specific advice in relation to concussion in sport. That has changed practices in lots and lots of sports around the country. I'm hopeful that actually authoritative advice of this kind could make a significant difference.
Well, I would be willing to accept the honourable gentleman's encouragement if this was advice to schools. But it's not. It's advice to parents and carers. If there was going to be authoritative advice into how schools, and in fact other organisations that have charge of children, scout troops, children's clubs, other publicly funded organisations look after children about advice, then I would have said possibly, even though there's a 12-month delay, frankly, for the CMO to tell us stuff we already know, as the honourable gentleman pointed out. I'll make a bit of progress if I may. The second step is for the government to publish within 12 months a plan for research. Not the conclusion of research, with no time limit, just a plan, a sort of vague aspiration that we should have a plan. No commencement, no sense of budget, no when it might come. I'm afraid, as I say, I'm sorry to say to the honourable gentleman, he's been sold a cosmetic pup. And then finally, on the third point, that the government has to publish this assessment, whatever that may be, fundamentally, as far as I can see, to tell us something we already know, which the honourable gentleman illustrated extremely vividly. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should all be furious about this. We should all be furious about the delay and the prevarication that is being injected into what could have been a huge step forward for parents and children. By all means.
I think I'm one of those people who is very angry about this, and my right honourable friend is a co-sponsor of this bill, so his disappointment must be even greater. But would you agree with me that one way forward would be for this bill in its present inadequate drafting to be get its second reading and then go into committee, and then the people's representatives in committee would be able to restore the bill into something what they expected?
Well, I was going to come on to that later, but I think the honourable gentleman was completely right. Would the honourable lady like to intervene?
The honourable gentleman for giving way, and I support very much what he's saying about the need for urgent action. So I would just like to ask the honourable gentleman what conversations were had before July the 4th last year about tightening up legislation around smartphones, because this problem didn't start on the day of the general election, and your government had the honourable man.
Well, I'm grateful, and as I said at the start of my speech, I lament the dithering and delay by the previous government too. There were attempts by backbenchers, and I was for the last 2 years of the government, by backbenchers to change the online safety bill to take exactly these sort of measures, which was again rebuffed by the ministers at that stage, and I regret that completely. To me, this is a national, if not international, emergency about which we are being far too passive and complacent. And I'm not necessarily making a political point about this, but this is about the weight of government and, frankly, the weight and influence of big tech against the health and welfare of our children. That applies to governments of all stripes in all countries across the world. But it's not just we in this chamber who should be furious. There should be plenty of people out there in the country who should be furious, because there were two key things that were promised in the original bill. First of all, an absolute school ban. All members will know that when they go to visit schools, one of the features that is coming through very strongly when they talk to head teachers is about the increase in parental aggression towards schools. The source of conflict at the school gate around all sorts of issues, not least the use of phones in schools. And by advocating a complete blanket ban on phones in schools, we were removing, at one stroke, a source of conflict between parent and teacher, as well as, at the same time, creating completely clear space for those kids to concentrate on their education. In school upon school across the country, they are bringing in their own policies, often in the teeth of parental and opposition from the children too. And their life is made immeasurably more difficult by not having an absolute ban. The second thing that was promised, and why we should be furious, was the raising of the digital age of consent. By not doing so, by not including this in the bill, we are consenting to those tech companies, as they have admitted in meetings in the run-up to this bill, in using children's data to addict them to their services. We know this happens. We see it happening. Anybody who has a teenage child that tries desperately to move them off from cradling this precious phone at the dinner table, even watching TV at the same time, they can't get away from their phone, would realise the addictive nature. And the fact that neither of these two steps is now in the bill, I'm afraid, is deeply, deeply lamentable. It feels to me as if the government has capitulated to big tech. I had a look online to see, and I'm not casting aspersions, but it'd be helpful if the Minister could tell us in his remarks what meetings he had with big tech companies in the run-up to this bill, and whether he's consulted or spoken to them. Well, that's useful to know. He's indicating zero. Well, I cannot then understand why the government has pressured the new member for Workington to produce what is frankly a cosmetic pup, betraying our children and capitulating to big tech. I'm afraid this bill is a shell of what it could have been, and as a result is yet another missed opportunity to improve the lives of our young people.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Whitehaven and Workington, on introducing this bill and on all of the work that he has done to advance the debate on the need for action to halt the harms caused by mobile phones and screen time to our children and young people. Less than a year ago, in the last Parliament, the Education Select Committee published a report on the impacts of screen time on education and well-being. Based on a careful examination of the evidence, the committee concluded that the harms of screen time and social media use significantly outweigh the benefits for younger children, whereas limited use of screens and genuinely educational uses of digital technology can have some benefits for older children. It is worth restating the evidence that the committee looked at. We have seen a 52% increase in children's screen time between 2020 and 2022, continuing to rise since that time. 25% of children and young people use their phones in a way that is consistent with behavioural addiction. This is a staggering statistic, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 5 children aged between 3 and 4 years has their own mobile phone. 1 in 4 children have their own phone by the age of 8, and almost all 12-year-olds have their own mobile phone. This is a very rapid change in behaviour, which has happened without any corresponding policy or regulatory framework. There is substantial evidence of the negative effects of this rapid increase in the use of smartphones by children. Research by the Children's Commissioner found that 79% of children had encountered violent pornography online by the age of 18. Girls and young women are particularly affected by pressure to conform with unrealistic body images they see in social media. And it isn't only girls and young women. Eating disorders and body dysmorphia are also rising rapidly in boys and young men. 81% of girls aged 7 to 21 have experienced some form of threatening or upsetting behaviour online. Mobile phone use is fueling a rapid increase in sexual crimes committed against children online, up 400% since 2013. 1 in 5 children aged 10 to 15 experienced at least one type of bullying behaviour online, and 3/4 of them said that this has happened either at school or during school time. There are impacts on learning at home and in the classroom too. It can take up to 20 minutes for pupils to refocus on what they were learning after engaging in non-academic activity on their phone. Children have worse working memory, worse processing speeds, attention levels, language skills and executive function. The sheer amount of time spent looking at screens is also contributing to our children becoming more sedentary and less active. As with all harms affecting children, it is children with the greatest vulnerability who suffer the most. Children in care, care leavers, young carers, children living in poverty and children with additional needs are the most susceptible to online harms. Vulnerable children are also at risk of criminal exploitation when using their screens. Social media and online gaming have been described by those leading the work to tackle County Lines exploitation as the foundation of County Lines recruitment. The crisis in the mental health and well-being amongst our children and young people is well documented. We are raising a generation of children and young people who are struggling with anxiety, depression, body image issues and eating disorders. Madam Deputy Speaker, every generation of parents has to help their children navigate a set of challenges that they did not themselves have to face. Screen time and social media are surely the parenting challenge of our generation. We have ample evidence of the harms that are being done. We also understand much more than previous generations about children's brain development, the way that the vital building blocks of their brains are developing so rapidly during childhood. And we know that screen time is quite literally rewiring young brains, resulting...
I thank the Honourable Lady for kindly giving way and found her speech absolutely fascinating because it's reflected my inbox from my constituents, from both parents saying we need the help and also those youngsters saying we know our concentration levels at school are affected, we know it's an addiction, it's uniting families in that way. And I hope in her position, in her role in terms of education, she can push the government to act for both sets in terms of a change in outcome.
I thank the member very much for her intervention, and the Education Selection Committee will certainly continue to take this issue extremely seriously and to monitor what happens going forward from here, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. We know that screen time is quite literally rewiring young brains, resulting in lower cognitive abilities, affecting language acquisition, critical thinking, social skills and attention span. Madam Deputy Speaker, when the government has evidence of harm, it has a duty to act. The point about legislation in this case is its power to change societal norms in a way that will make a difference to parents and professionals currently struggling to limit the harms of screen time, but lacking the backup to do so. There are many comparable examples, with smoking and seatbelts being the most obvious, where the evidence of harm became clear, but the debate raged for many years with counter-arguments against legislation. And if I can figure out where my notes have gone, and I'll happily give way.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and she's absolutely right that the Honourable Gentleman from Workington has done an enormous amount of work on this, and it's obvious that his desire is, as she say, that the government should act in the face of evidence. Does she think that this bill, as negotiated with the government, constitutes acting?
Member very much for his intervention, for helping me out at a difficult moment while I wrestle my papers, and if he'll bear with me now that I've found the correct place in my speech, I'll tell him what I believe should happen next. The debate on both smoking and seatbelts raged for years, with much controversy at the time, some demanding higher and higher levels of proof, some arguing that this could just be dealt with through guidance, through individuals choosing to change their behaviour. I'll happily give way.
Does the Honourable Lady not, though, recognise that unlike the case, particularly with the indoor smoking ban, this is very much not a one-off event in terms of regulation of mobile technology and social media? When the bill that was to go on to become the Online Safety Act was published, it genuinely was world-leading in many respects, but as the Honourable Gentleman has said, many countries have now introduced other measures that do go further than this. Isn't the point that we should be taking action now and then continuing to develop it going forward, rather than just introducing a series of reviews?
the honourable member for his intervention. If you just bear with me for a moment, I'll get to some of the points that I believe he was wishing to emphasise there. In the end, in both of those cases of seatbelts and smoking, legislation had the effect of changing behaviour, changing societal norms, and in both cases, decades on from legislation being introduced, it is hard to imagine that the regulation was ever controversial. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Select Committee recommended last year action across government departments to protect children from addiction, online harms and the mental health impacts of excessive use of smartphones. It supported a ban on mobile phones in schools and recommended a formal monitoring mechanism for a ban introduced through guidance, leading potentially to a ban in legislation. It recommended guidance for parents who it found are lacking in confidence to know exactly how to tackle this issue affecting their children and young people. And it recommended that the guidance should include, particularly for parents of babies and very young children, an emphasis on the importance of face-to-face interactions with their children and guidance on the impact of parental use of screens while caring for very young children, which is also an aspect that I think we perhaps don't debate enough in this place. It supported an increase to age 16 as the age of digital consent. And amongst several other recommendations, it recommended a promotion of a children's class of phone, which can be used for parental contact and for GPS locations, but not for internet access. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I share the concerns of many in this House that the government is not acting with the urgency that is required in the face of evidence it already has. This bill will deliver, even in the form that is presented today, some positive interventions which will make a difference. But I fear that the government is doing too little, too slowly on this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, parents want strong legislation. Schools want strong legislation. Strong legislation will help to change societal norms in the way that is needed to protect children and young people and to stop the harms. The Education Select Committee will continue to take a very close interest in what happens going forward from here, the impact of the measures that the government is introducing. But I urge the government to get on really quickly with the review and the guidance that it will commit to today, and to go further and put in place a framework in law which can help parents and schools and professionals working with children with the challenge that all of us need to get to grips with urgency and speed.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am pleased today to speak in support of the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington's Protection of Children, Digital Safety and Data Protection Bill. And I must first start by declaring my interest. I am a mother of 3 children who enjoy nothing more than staring at their screens day in and day out. If they could, they'd be on them 24/7. Exactly. No longer are our children clamouring to go out and play or see their friends. Instead, they want to do everything through a screen. They want to watch endless YouTube videos.
Yes.
I never realised the unpacking of a toy or a slime-making video could hold such interest. It seems they take their joy in watching others do things online instead of actually doing them in the real world. Exactly. Even rather bizarrely, the playing of a computer game.
Exactly.
Yet I would be a hypocrite if I didn't call out my own behaviour on this front. I too am addicted to my phone. Yes, I need it for this job so I can justify some of my use, but I often find myself endlessly doom-scrolling, and I'm too embarrassed to tell you the amount of hours I spend staring at it every week, Madam Deputy Speaker. But at least my addiction started as a fully developed adult after a childhood of play and socialisation where I learnt those much-needed life skills. This generation of children isn't so lucky. The huge amount of time spent online is incredibly damaging in so many ways. It is no coincidence that we see a mental health crisis in our young people at the same time as mass adoption of smartphones and access to social media. Some may underplay the importance of social media and screens in the challenges we face today as a society, and indeed it can be difficult to conclusively prove the role of one particular factor in the effects we're currently seeing. But I would suggest when it comes to our children, we should always err on the side of caution and protect them from potentially harmful influences. In a recent survey, social media and excessive screen time was ranked as the top issue affecting children's mental well-being. To put that in context, it was ranked higher than alcohol and bullying. Another significant risk to mental health is exposure to harmful online content. This is something I am incredibly concerned about, especially given the proliferation of extreme pornography, harmful content, and unrealistic body images. If children spend all their time in this fantasy world that is completely disjointed from reality, it is of course going to change how they view people, relationships, and the world in general. This is supported by Ofcom's 2024 research, which found that older teens are indeed finding it harder to distinguish the real from the fake online. And the more mundane things in life that don't trigger a dopamine hit seem an even less appealing way to spend time to a child jacked up on likes and shares. Their attention spans getting shorter with an ever-increasing need for higher levels of stimulation. Is it no wonder that our children seem less interested in reading a book or baking a cake nowadays? The evidence from health professionals for safer screens shows that children who routinely spend extended periods on their smartphones have poor eyesight, inhibited speech and language development, interrupted sleep and rising rates of anxiety. We are allowing our children to become addicts. And social media is designed with exactly that in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is meant to be addictive and compelling. It wants users to stay online for prolonged periods and to keep engaging with content. Those of us who use it ourselves know this all to be true. So how on earth do we expect our children to manage and moderate appropriately? In Ofcom's 2024 research, they reported that overall use of social media sites or apps among all 5 to 7-year-olds has increased year on year. Online gaming for this group has also increased significantly, as has the watching of live-streamed content. Under current data protection law, the age at which children can access Information Society Services, ISS, is 13. ISS includes most social media platforms and content streaming services. It's important to acknowledge that the Online Safety Act 2003 has introduced protections for children by ensuring that online platforms will have to remove illegal content, such as child sexual abuse material, prevent children from accessing harmful content, for example, that encouraging suicide, self-harm or bullying, and introduce age-checking measures to restrict access to pornographic material. These are all much welcomed improvements, but they need to be put in place at pace and be effectively enforced. So coming to this bill, I commend the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington for all his work on this important topic, and I will do all I can to support him in making the online world safer for our children. This bill is an important precursor for the myriad of change needed in this area, and I know many parents will support him in calling for the digital age of consent to be looked at again. This bill doesn't call for the age limit to be increased to 16, but it does call for the UK's Chief Medical Officer to look at this important issue in detail and ultimately issue a statement on whether the digital age of consent should be increased. 75% of Brits now back raising the minimum age from 13 to 16, as per a recent More in Common survey, for all the reasons that have been raised today in this debate. And 129,000 people signed an e-petition calling for social media companies to be banned from letting children under 16 create social media accounts. It is past time for tech companies and us here in this House to take responsibility for keeping our children and young people safe. I am not normally someone in favour of blanket bans, and you'll quite often hear me talking about the importance of parents and carers taking responsibility for looking after their children. However, in this instance, I deviate a little. And that's because as a parent myself that is wrangling with exactly this issue now, I know how difficult it is to say to a child they can't do something where every single other child in the class is. If a group of friends is only interacting online, then what are the consequences to my child if I prohibit them from joining in? Isolation, loneliness, loss of self-esteem quite possibly. Very real costs that shouldn't be underestimated. And that's why the state needs to step in. You won't hear me saying that very much, but the state needs to step in and remove the option for all. This would help parents across the country that want the best for their children without the downsides.
I wonder if she...
I will give way.
I'm very grateful to her, and she very vividly illustrated the problem with this kind of collective action and peer pressure. And I wonder if she could reflect on the fact that it's not just the addictive nature of the application, that is pulling our kids in, but the fact that these applications are free, and therefore everybody is encouraged to get them, so we get 100% coverage, and it's therefore very hard to deny them to your child if it's the only child without.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I completely concur with everything that he's just said. It is completely accessible to all our children, so it's very hard for one child to be kept separate from it, and that is why it's really important that we address this moving forward. But increasing the digital age of consent is just the first step. We have so much more to do. We also need to ban smartphones in schools for children up to the age of 16. On a typical workday, 42% of older teenagers say their smartphone is distracting them from schoolwork, and half say social media has distracted them enough to impact their grades. Notably, only 11% of schools are genuinely smartphone-free currently, and children at these schools get GCSE results 1 to 2 grades higher. So there is clearly much upside in banning smartphones in schools. I would urge the government to seriously consider implementing this much-needed restriction. It would be a game changer, protecting children and improving educational outcomes all in one fell swoop. Our schools need this ban to be in statute and not just in guidance for them to be able to effectively police and enforce it. I also want to pay tribute to Smartphone Free Childhood for all their work in raising awareness on this important issue. In closing, I would hope that members today will support this bill, which moves us forward in our mission to protect our children from an increasingly insidious online realm that they are simply not equipped to navigate. But I also hope that this is just the beginning, and in moving forward we will see the digital age of consent raised to 16 and a ban on smartphones in school. The value from these two changes alone would be huge for our society and would ensure the well-being of this generation and future generations of children are safeguarded. Yeah. I cannot think of anything more important.
Richard Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I didn't actually pick my notes up then. I was expected to be called so quickly. Thank you. I come to this debate as somebody who first bought a first mobile phone 30 years ago at the age of 23. I was hoping you'd look more surprised at that than you are. I remember very much... I very much thank you for the interruption. I very much remember the joy of phoning the landline of my housemates from bed and asking them to bring me a cup of tea, and the excitement of sending and receiving my first text message, and the infantile joy of playing Snake whilst waiting for a train. But no one would have predicted where we would be by this point, and I thank my honourable friend for introducing this bill, which is an essential step forward for online safety. It demonstrates his genuine commitment to addressing this critical issue, but also raises awareness both in this place and across the country of the pressing need for a legally recognised age of internet adulthood to correspond to the very adult content available online. For too long, tech bosses have moved forward unchecked, while our children bear the consequences of algorithms that, at best, are designed to create a generation of screen addicts and, at worst, expose young people to harmful and disturbing content. 15 years ago, many tech leaders claimed that the rising mental health crisis amongst children and young people was unrelated to screen use. However, emerging data now refutes this, with a study from King's College London revealing that nearly 25%, or 1 in 4 that still use old money, of children and young people engage with their smartphones in a manner consistent with behavioural addiction. Indeed, we are not dealing with the same passive tech bosses who were satisfied in just promoting this addictive quality to sell them to children. As even in the past year, the digital landscape has shifted so much that some tech bosses are actively refusing to remove content from their platforms, such as violent material and eating disorder content, under the guise that doing so would infringe on these individuals' free speech. As we all know, there is a considerable disparity between the two, which is why I strongly support raising the age of digital adulthood. This issue is particularly urgent in my constituency of the Isle of Wight West, where young people face some of the highest rates of under-18 mental health and self-harm related hospital admissions in the South East and amongst the highest in the country. However, accessing the necessary report is made even more difficult by Ireland's isolation. The high cost and limited availability of ferry travel, you were waiting for that, I know, creates already facing the pressures of an increasingly connected world. They are further disadvantaged by transport restrictions that make seeking specialist care on the mainland far more challenging. Tech companies have proved time and time again that they see kids as nothing more than pound signs. The more time they can keep children glued to their screens, the more money these platforms make. And they achieve this by maliciously harvesting their data and using it to push content designed to keep them hooked, prioritising what's most addictive over what's safest. By prohibiting tech companies from collecting data from under-16s, this bill would aim at the heart of the exploitative algorithms designed to keep young users online for longer. It ensures that children are no longer targeted with addictive content designed to prioritise profit over their well-being, and I support this bill.
Caroline Voaden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to begin by congratulating the member for Whitehaven and Workington for bringing his private member's bill to the House, and I'm proud to be one of the co-sponsors. It has clearly been a complicated journey to get to this point, and the bill may not resemble quite what he originally had in mind, but the sheer fact of bringing this bill forward has lit up a national conversation about the impact on our children of smartphone use and social media. A conversation that was growing ever louder, but which has now spilled over passionately into the inboxes of nearly every member of this House. This bill may not be as ambitious as some would like, and the wheels may turn slowly in this place, far slower than the lightning pace of modern tech. But I would like to assure every one of my constituents in South Devon who wrote to me about the bill and who campaign loudly on this topic that their voices have been heard, and that within the bounds of our political system, we as MPs and as parents and grandparents have not only heard them, but we share their concerns. I hope that today is just a first step in a journey which will be far-reaching and hopefully fairly swift. I know I'm not alone to be somewhat disappointed that the bill we see today is but a shadow of its former self, and that the government has been so timid in what it is willing to do to try and save our children and young people from something that is clearly causing them considerable harm. Which is why the Liberal Democrats have decided to pick up the baton and table an amendment to the Data User and Access Bill. Our amendment will call on the government to bring UK data into line with many other UK data law into line with many other European countries by raising the minimum age a user must be before an internet company can collect, process and store their data without parental consent to 16. I do look forward to seeing the guidance from the UK Chief Medical Officer on the impact of smartphones and social media on children. 6 years is a long time in the tech world, and we know that much has changed since this guidance was last written in 2019. And I also welcome funding for more research into the impacts of social media and phone use. I expect the new research will not differ too much from what has already been written, following studies from various developed countries, including the UK, Japan, Canada and Australia. That over the last 10 years, a period in which smartphone usage has exploded, the number of mental health admissions to hospital in teenagers has risen by 65%. That admissions for eating disorders among girls aged 11 to 15 have gone up by a staggering 638%. That childhood myopia is up 50%, that ADHD diagnoses are up 56%, and that more and more children are struggling with difficult speech and language challenges. No, we cannot say for sure that there is a direct causal link, but we can see the trend lines in the graphs, and we know they started rising before the pandemic was ever heard of, and we know it's not just the UK experiencing such troubling developments. Madam Deputy Speaker, we do a lot to protect our children in this country, and that's down to a mixture of practice, custom and legislation. We generally don't let our children smoke or drink. We certainly don't let them drive cars. We put babies in ever more sophisticated car seats, and we know that it's not a good idea to put fizzy drinks in babies' bottles. And yet, a recent Ofcom report said that 100% of 17-year-olds have a mobile phone, 28% of 5 to 7-year-olds have one, and most worryingly still, 17% of 3 to 4-year-olds have one. Yet medical professionals from all disciplines tell us of the harm children are experiencing from long hours glued to a screen. As a proud co-sponsor of this bill, I too have heard from health professionals who've given evidence to us on mental health, obesity, eyesight and more. And we also heard heart-rending stories from parents whose children had been subject to the most horrific online abuse, and from some who have unbearably lost their precious children as a result of harms in the digital world. While their stories were extreme and deeply troubling, somehow, incredibly, it didn't even seem that shocking that the online world had wrought such devastating harm into real lives. Because what is happening online is clearly impacting the everyday lives of children and teenagers, and we, as responsible adults and legislators, have a duty to try and mitigate these harms. I'm thinking now particularly of the horrible, dangerous misogyny of the likes of Andrew Tate, which is being lapped up by boys who are under his influence, boys who then spread his misogynistic hate speech. I'm thinking of the violent pornography which is being accessed and viewed by children as young as 9 or 10. Pornography that isn't just naked pictures like you'd find in an old-fashioned top-shelf magazine, I'm told, but violent porn. Not old enough, thank you. But violent porn that celebrates assault and rape. We know that this is leading to an increase in harmful practices such as strangulation, that it warps the way young people view sexual relationships, and that it is directly impacting on the health and well-being, particularly of young women across the country. Yesterday, this chamber heard some brilliant and impassioned speeches from many honourable women members, timed to coincide with International Women's Day tomorrow. And on a day that celebrates women, we think about girls too. And I don't want our girls to think that they have to share nude photos to be liked, or to worry themselves sick about the shape of their body to the point that they stop eating. We've heard about the rise in children who have speech and language challenges. It's known that sticking a baby in front of an iPad will not help it learn to communicate. Babies need interaction with human faces and voices to learn. And we've heard about how children's eyesight is worsening because they spend so many hours looking at a closely held screen. And we all know about the incessant rise in poor mental health, anxiety and depression among teenagers. Parents across my constituency of South Devon are desperate to protect their children, but overwhelmed by the digital world and the power it has over young people. They want us to support them with legislation so that they can push back against the might of the tech giants. And we must not let the tech giants lobby us in the way the tobacco companies did so successfully for decades. Children are addicted to these screens because of wicked algorithms that lure them in and keep them hooked, struggling with their body image because they don't look like the influencers they are watching, depressed at their lives because they don't resemble the doctored, airbrushed Instagram image of perfection they see on their screens, and brainwashed by those influencers who spew toxic messages through their pages. They know this, but they find it hard to counteract it. And we know the brightest brains in the tech world have designed social media apps to do exactly this. One former Facebook employee said, "You have a business model designed to engage you and get you to basically suck as much time out of your life as possible, and then selling that attention to advertisers." We must unlock the potential of technology by designing it with children and young people in mind. Our amendment to the data bill would not ban children under 16 from social media, but more importantly, online services would need to change how they deal with children's data and create a less addictive, more child-friendly online environment. Our amendment will call on the government to prioritise robust standards for digital technology so that rights and privacy are upheld by design and default. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Devon, 2,591 parents have signed the pact saying they will not buy their child a smartphone. But we know that tech use is one of the biggest causes of friction in families, and parents need our support to back that choice. It is a public health matter. The Liberal Democrats are open to the idea of a legal ban on smartphone use in schools, enshrining existing guidance into the law, and we do hope that the government will look seriously at this. This measure should not be about restricting freedoms, but about creating an environment conducive to learning and free from distractions. We also understand the need for discretion, and exceptions must be made for young carers or children who use smartphones to monitor health conditions, ensuring fairness and practicality. Parents must be empowered to protect their children online, including through digital literacy education, and advice and support for parents on best practice is key. I also want to see a public health programme similar to those we have seen on seatbelts and smoking over the years, so that no parent can be left unaware of the potential harms of letting small children become addicted to a device that will cause so much harm as they grow.
Jess Asato.
Speaker, and can I start by thanking my honourable friend the member for Whitehaven and Workington, for the huge amount of work he has put into this legislation. I am very proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill in support of his tireless efforts in this area, his leadership and his lifelong commitment to safeguarding children from harm. Over the past 6 months, this bill has been a lightning rod for the conversation around children's access to smartphones and social media. This bill does not mark the end of that conversation, but rather the start of a national debate on what childhood in the online age should look like. I am glad that the government has positively engaged with this bill and that through this legislation we can now see a path towards ensuring that we give children the best possible and, crucially, least harmful start in life. Between 2017 and 2021, there was a 60% increase in the number of children with a probable mental health condition, including depression, anxiety, eating disorders and body dysmorphia, with the impact being particularly acute for young women, as many have already mentioned. Screen time also has links to poor physical health outcomes, such as childhood obesity. I was particularly concerned to learn in one of my honourable friend's bill hearings about data linking screen use to short-sightedness and worse eye health. A report from the College of Optometrists in 2023 found that cases of myopia among children aged 5 to 16 have risen by 12% over the last 5 years in the UK. Heavy smartphone use also impacts sleep patterns and the ability to fall or stay asleep, as many of us will know. One study found that children are 79% less likely to get the recommended 8 hours of sleep if they use their phone. That clearly has an effect on their attainment and life outcomes. Indeed, I've just completely lost my place. Indeed, 4 in 10 teenagers admit that their smartphone is distracting them from schoolwork. Clause 1 requires the UK Chief Medical Officer to publish advice for parents and carers on the use of smartphones and social media by children, which we welcome. This is particularly key because the issue of young people's smartphones and social media does require, as has been argued, a public health focus. We know that almost all children by age 15 have a smartphone, and as has been said by my honourable friend, that it is vulnerable children who are spending significantly longer on their phones. It is our duty in this place to protect children who are vulnerable and the most vulnerable of children. For almost a quarter of their children, smartphone use has become a behavioural addiction, and as we have also heard, this is not accidental. Tech companies have created products without the input of child development experts, and we know this because they told us that they did not have any child development experts on their product boards when they came to a session organised by my right honourable friend. These algorithms seek to get young people hooked before they can even properly comprehend it, and like a drug, keep coming back for more. Children have sadly lost a love of reading. Reading is at its lowest level in the UK now amongst our children, and also the outdoors. As Jonathan Haidt argues in his book, The Anxious Generation, childhood has ceased to be play-based and now has become phone-based. This simultaneous overprotectiveness offline and underprotectiveness online has created a perfect storm for inhibiting children's development. We are witnessing, for example, a marked increase in referrals for delayed speech and language abilities. There are now pram adaptations for babies and toddlers to watch smartphones, rather than learning from the stimulus of the real world around them. So I hope that the Chief Medical Officer's remit extends to working with early childhood and speech and language organisations to issue guidance for parents in the very early years. The online world that we are sending our children out into is not a world we would send them out to in real life, and yet this is their real life. Children as young as 7 are stumbling across and currently freely able to access pornographic content online. One of the key areas the Children's Commissioner found that children access pornography is, perhaps surprisingly, the social media platform X. 8 in 10 children have encountered violent pornography online by the age of 18, and this is having serious consequences on desensitising young boys and girls and warping their perceptions of healthy sex and relationships. This is why the... Yes, of course.
My honourable friend makes a very, very important point. And in this debate, we're focusing a lot on children. But the reality is that the scars that the children are scarred with when they're young will endure with them for the rest of their lives. So when one talks about pornography, that will scar their relationships and ability to form relationships through the rest of their lives, which is another reason why this bill is so very, very important. I'm obliged, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm obliged to my honourable friend.
Jess Asato.
I'm incredibly grateful for the honourable member's intervention, and that is very true. We have seen a huge increase, for example, in the use of strangulation in sexual relationships on women, 40% increase. There is very much to say that this is related to the way in which more and more young people are watching strangulation and pornography online, which is another subject, but definitely would like to see that go as well. So as I was saying, it's really, really important that the commencement of age verification in the Online Safety Act that was introduced by the previous government and supported by the Labour front bench at the time, this must be upheld and to the most robust standards. And I look forward to the Minister saying that that is exactly what the government will do.
If she will, that is exactly what the government will do.
Jess Asato.
To the Minister. Social media is also fueling the rise of an extremist misogyny online and normalising harassment and violence against women and girls in real life. As my honourable friend, the member of Kettering, so bravely recounted in this place yesterday, we are not immune to this in this place ourselves. 90% of girls say they have been sent an explicit picture or video. The New Britain project, More in Common, and the National Education Union recently ran a focus group in my constituency on the issue with parents and their children's access to smartphones. In it, a mother spoke of how her daughter was so regularly being sent dick pics that by the age of 15, the girl was used to drawing a little sombrero on the picture, sending it back and blocking the sender. She said, the mother, "No child that age should be seeing male penises. It's quite traumatic, isn't it, for a kid to be witnessing that kind of thing? But it is everywhere. Children should not be being forced to find a way to cope with funny pictures because it's something that's incessantly traumatising them. We wouldn't accept our children being flashed in the streets, so why is it different online? And why do we not expect the tech companies to act? This is something that their products enable to happen to our children all day, every day. And yet, we still don't have the movement from them. And we know it's only getting worse, particularly with the use of AI and the rise of new deepfakes. Thankfully, I know the government is now taking strong action on deepfakes, but I urge them to look further at age verification for app stores so that our young people know that when they access app stores, the content on them is right for their age and their level of development. Online sexual crimes committed against children have risen by 400% since 2013. We have a generation growing up chronically online, raised by the internet, and we cannot stand idly by in the name of freedom or freedom of speech, because there is no freedom in addiction. There is no freedom in being harmed. There is no freedom in being underdeveloped as a child because you've not experienced socialisation or the great outdoors or the pleasure of books, or simply not being harmed from being sent horrible things that you shouldn't have to see. Children in the online world are taught to look up to role models with unhealthy opinions, unrealistic beauty standards, and conspicuous wealth beyond their dreams.
And children are being sold and marketed to all day, every day. And when they can't afford it, or they don't look like it, they feel they are worthless. Children are cyberbullied. They're exposed to content that encourages self-harm and competitive anorexia, and material that romanticizes suicide. And we know that this has already caused untold harm from the parents who have seen their children take their own lives after engaging with this material. Our children are becoming infected as part of an epidemic of loneliness. And at some point in this place, we have to say enough is enough. Because as a parent of young children myself, I know that parents cannot and should not be expected to do this alone. We need a decisive legal and cultural shift that reclaims childhood for the real world. We know there is an article every month about how do we take ourselves away from toxic social media, how to detox from social media, just like how to detox after Christmas. We read that content as adults, and we also struggle ourselves to stop looking at it. So how do we expect our children to be able to exercise self-control that we ourselves do not have? We need to see the UK follow countries like Australia by raising the age of online consent from 13 to 16. 55% of Gen Z and 86% of parents support this idea in the UK. 130,000 people recently signed a petition on the UK Parliament website to that effect. And I also believe we need to create a new watershed of social norms by banning smartphones at school. Too many head teachers that I speak to tell me that they're doing the right thing by banning smartphones in their school. But they get the complaints from their students and parents when they see children at other schools doing something differently. And it makes it harder for parents to enforce rules and norms in their own home when they can't point to principles that the whole of our country adheres to. Yes, of course.
I wonder if my honourable friend would like to join me in congratulating Anna Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, who just 2 weeks ago announced that he will be banning mobile phones in schools across Scotland.
Asato. I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and, of course, Esher and her remarks. Parents and future generations will not forgive us if we don't act swiftly. I am hopeful that in the Government's assessment as part of Clause 3, we will finally see a recognition that the status quo is not working for children or parents and that radical action is needed. Only then can we work to ensure that children are able to grow up and develop without trauma, without harm, and without being addicted to being harmed and traumatised. This bill gets us closer to that, and I am happy to support it.
Damian Hinds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suggest there are many things we worry about with our children's use of phones and social media, but broadly speaking, grouped into three categories. The first is about content, from pornography and violence to the insidious effects of curated lives and influencers and celebs on our children, on their sense of self-worth, on their body image and so on, through to dodgy news and views propagated across the internet, not by worth, let alone veracity, but by engagement and likes. And all of these things with vortexes that children can get sucked deeper and deeper into. The second is about contact. Contact in the worst cases for child abuse and the generation of child sexual abuse material, through to, at a lower level, contact that can be from other children. And what we call in this house cyberbullying. No child ever uses that phrase. They just talk about people being very mean to each other online. And then the third area is about time. The sheer amount of time that gets sucked out of these children into these activities. And it is the compounding factor, because it is the thing that makes the other two things, content and contact, worse and more risky. It also has an effect on children's sleep, on their concentration, even on their physical development. And it crowds out the other things that we want children to be doing, and children themselves want to be doing when they do them. And if ever you do get a child away from their phone for a full weekend, they talk about how wonderful an experience that was with their friends. Now, the Online Safety Act, Madam Deputy Speaker, did some very good things on content and on contact. There was more to do, but it made some very good progress. But we have a lot more to do, in particular on the topic of time and the addictiveness of social media. And that is where I think the work of the honourable gentleman has been incredibly valuable. I commend him, the honourable member for Whitehaven and Workington, for all the work he has done in the lead up to this point, and his use of convening power to bring together so many individuals and organisations. Those conversations, some of which I had the opportunity to attend, covered a huge range. Now, obviously, the bill that we have in front of us today is, well, let us call it somewhat thinner than that bill that was envisaged. And I will give way.
I'm grateful to him. I also attended events that the honourable gentleman pulled together, and the strong characteristic, would he agree with me, the strong characteristic that came out of all of them was deep and profound anger amongst parents about what has been allowed to develop.
No, I think that is right. I mean, the other thing I was very struck by in some of the sessions that I heard was the sort of great unity, actually, of view. So whether you were talking to trade unions or charities, parent groups, doctors, as well as parents, a great commonality of view about what needed to be done. Look, I understand what happens sometimes with private members' bills and the need, to make progress, the need for government support. So I say to the government, to the front bench, this is a huge missed opportunity. Look behind him. Look behind him. Look at all his colleagues who have rearranged their Fridays, rearranged their surgeries and all their appointments because they believe in this subject. Listen to the list that his honourable friend read out of all those organisations that came together in support of action in this area. It is so worth doing. And we have made good progress with the Online Safety Act, but there is further to go. And there are things you can do with a private member's bill, which it is harder sometimes to do with government legislation because of the party political controversies that come in. And this is a missed opportunity because this may well be the only private member's bill with a good chance of success at the top of the ballot that happens during this entire Parliament. Now, the bill as drafted is unlikely to require this House to divide because there is not much in it that anybody could disagree on. So I will, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, focus my comments on the themes that may be covered within those things that the bill envisages. In other words, the CMO's advice for parents on the use of smartphones and social media, and the plan for research that the Secretary of State will prepare on the effect of the use of social media on children, and the appropriateness and effectiveness of the so-called digital age of consent. Now, in bringing together that evidence, in doing that research, I'm just going to say one very simple thing to the Minister. The evidence is not perfect today. It will not be perfect in 1 year. It will never, ever be perfect. And if we hang around waiting for perfect evidence, we will never act in the way that we should. Why is it not perfect? Because this is a phenomenon that has happened literally across the entire world at the same time. There is no control group. The studies that there are, given that this is such a huge topic, the studies that there are trying to narrow down to something manageable tend to end up looking at either Facebook or Twitter, neither of which is particularly relevant for teenagers. And when we have proxy studies, they are generally inadequate. So if you talk about phone use in schools, the studies tend to look at a school that does have a phone ban versus a school that does not. That is a totally invalid scientific comparison because there could be all sorts of other things going on. And the sort of school that is likely to do well in GCSEs is also likely to be the sort of school that brings in a phone ban rather than being able to prove the direction of causality. And anyway, people would say there hasn't been enough time because this is a technology that constantly develops. It may have been around for 20 years or so, but this version of it has only been around for 18 months. So there hasn't been time to conclusively say what the effects are. And all of that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not about to change. The evidence will continue to be imperfect. Now, the evidence that we do have, I think, actually is pretty clear. And we know that some screen time, the Honourable Lady who chairs the Select Committee mentioned this, that there can be some benefit from relatively small amounts of screen time. PISA 19 covered this in some detail, looking at multiple countries. They talked about a Goldilocks effect, where about an hour of screen time a day seemed to be correlated with increased levels of well-being. But the same study found that with high levels of well-being in almost every country studied, with the fascinating exception of the Dominican Republic, but in almost all countries studied, high levels of internet usage was associated with lower levels of life satisfaction. And there's lots of other studies as well. Colleagues have referred to them that look at happiness, quality of relationships, eyesight, sleep, concentration. And then, of course, there is the rising prevalence of mental ill health in young people. And quite often, when people look at the numbers on mental ill health, particularly in teenagers, people will reach immediately for their preferred topic, their preferred explanation for why teenagers are having these difficulties. And sometimes it gets quite political. An important point to note that this rise in teenage mental ill health is not uniquely a British phenomenon. In fact, in the UNICEF Gallup study of 2021 called Changing Childhood, on the two main measures that they took of mental well-being, which were, first of all, how often do you experience feeling worried, nervous or anxious, and how often do you experience feeling depressed or having little interest in doing things, this country, the UK, was broadly in line with the average of 21 countries, including France, Germany and the US, or actually slightly better on most of the measures. And there are ample other studies from around the world. The multicultural health behaviours of school-aged children from the WHO. In France, I won't try and do the language, the EDC study, episodes of depressive, whatever characterisé should be translated as, which is quite a long time series. There's a shorter time series in the United States, Trends in Mental Wellbeing. And of course here, actually the best study of all, which is the mental health of children and young people in England study from the NHS. And I'd just say, in passing to the government, I don't think we've yet had a commitment from the DHSC to carry on with that time series. It's incredibly valuable, and that would be a relatively simple thing that the government could do. Now, the important point is that, sorry, I've said already, it's not uniquely a British phenomenon. It's also not only about COVID. And a lot of these studies of recent years have set out to answer the question, what happened to children's mental health during COVID, which is a perfectly legitimate question. But if you look at the shape of the curve, it looks very unlikely that it started in COVID. And in the NHS study, the CYPMH study here, it carries on growing long after COVID, up until the most recent wave. It is, and I'm sure the Minister, he said this in a debate the other day in Westminster, and he's right, that it is entirely invalid to infer causality from correlation. But the Bradford Hill criteria that his honourable friend mentioned are particularly relevant here, and particularly, I would say, among those, the criteria of consistency, strength, plausibility, coherence and analogy, as well as, of course, temporality. In any event, it seems odd, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we allow something to happen to our children because we cannot 100% prove it causes harm, rather than because we can prove that it is safe. That is not the way we deal with children's toys. It is not the way we deal with children's food. It is not the way we deal with children's medicine. And I would turn the question around and say to people who query the direction of causality, with something like self-harm, are you honestly trying to tell me that the incidence of self-harm in our country today is nothing to do with the prevalence, the normalisation of imagery around self-harm on social media? And as I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I worry that if we continue to seek perfect information, we simply will not act as we should. I have pages more to say, but I'm not going to say it because I know there are many colleagues who wish to speak.
Liam Conlon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I also begin by thanking the honourable member, my friend for Whitehaven and Workington, who I've now started calling the patron saint of the Smartphone-Free Childhood campaign. He often comes up on the doorsteps in Beckenham and Penge when speaking to parents as well. This topic has prompted a huge response, both in my own constituency and I know across the country as well. And I'd like to welcome Elizabeth, Sarah and other constituents who are here today to watch this debate. I'd also like to pay tribute to Crispin, Raj and all the brilliant local parents and campaigners I've been working with on this. I want to give some time to this debate to explore the wealth of feedback I've had from my constituents before going on to talk about the type of change we need to see across the country and how that change needs to be cultural, it needs to put children and parents first and place the onus on social media companies and manufacturers to prove their products are safe, all whilst ensuring we don't miss out on the many benefits of technology. Ahead of today's debate, I've engaged extensively with 3 key groups in Beckenham and Penge: young people, parents and school leaders. The first, young people, despite being the reason we are here today, are the group we most risk excluding from this conversation. That's why I held a focus group at a local secondary school, Harris Academy, Beckenham, and spoke to students from a range of year groups about their views on how smartphones are changing childhood. At this focus group, half of the students said that smartphones and social media overall have a negative impact on their mental health. The majority of students told me they would feel panicked without their mobile phone. And some spoke to me with quiet self-awareness about how they knew their mobile phone had acted as a barrier to interaction with their family. This is all time they are not spending building meaningful relationships through face-to-face conversation and developing the social and communication skills they will need in life. The second group, teachers, offered another perspective. On Monday this week, I was delighted to bring together a group of 12 primary and secondary school head teachers from right across my constituency. We discussed the impact of their students' smartphone use in and out of schools. What stood out the most from this conversation is the sheer amount of time that they, as school leaders, have to spend week after week dealing with issues that have taken place on their students' phones. Cyberbullying, sexting, the sharing of graphic videos or explicit photos, often of the students themselves. All of this and more is crossing our teachers' desks and demanding hours of their time every day, pulling them away from their core and crucial job of educating. And finally, parents. In Beckenham and Penge, concerns around smartphone and social media use easily falls into the top 5 issues that constituents have contacted me about since my election to this House last July. Last Friday, I put out a survey asking parents in my constituency for their views. Within a week, I have received well over 500 responses. 89% of respondents agree that smartphones and social media have a negative impact on their children's mental health. But what makes this figure more shocking is that 70% of those who agreed with this statement are parents of primary-age children. That is, children under the age of 12. And more than 3/4 of parents agreed that the negatives of their child having a smartphone outweigh the positives. Digging into this, I asked parents if they would have any concerns were their child not to have a smartphone. Understandably, the ability for them to call home in an emergency or to track them on their journey to and from school came up a fair amount, but we know that there are other options on the market which address many of these features today. The damage is undeniable and is reflected in statistics across the country. Since smartphones became prominent in 2012, we have seen a 27% increase in speech and language challenges, a 65% rise in mental health admissions to hospital, and a 640% increase in eating disorders. The average teenager today gets 337 notifications in a day. The average takes out a 1 every 6 minutes, and once they receive a notification, it takes 23 minutes for them to refocus on what they are doing. And finally, one I hadn't heard until this week is that 1 in 3 parents admit to crying over their child's smartphone use. These figures chime with what parents have fed back to me across the constituency. One constituent, Gemma, who has worked in the smartphone industry for 15 years, says, "My child is 7, so is not yet exposed to smartphones in a significant way. But when he does play games on his phone, his behaviour is noticeably different. He's hyperactive, gets emotional quickly and easily, and is devastated when we say the time to play is up. Another constituent, Megan, is a therapist by profession. She said, "I regularly hear adult clients sharing how smartphones negatively impact their mental health, from raised anxiety to hours lost doom scrolling to more serious harms. If we as adults sometimes struggle to manage our own smartphone use, how are we expecting our children and teenagers to be able to moderate theirs?"
On that point,
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm grateful for my honourable friend giving way, and I'm pleased that this government is committed to tackling this mental health epidemic that we have for adults and children in this country, and in particular in relation to the specialist mental health professionals that are going to be installed in every school. And I know parents in my constituency of Amber Valley will welcome this. Does the honourable member agree with me that the provisions in this bill will be a useful tool in preventing mental health issues in the first place and helping parents to safeguard their children's mental health?
Liam Conlon.
Absolutely, and a key provision of this bill will provide the evidence base on which to take the best action moving forward. Another parent, Georgia, simply said to me that my children are 2 and 4 and smartphones are my greater fear in raising them. And I've had so many other constituents write in, and I would like to thank everyone who has responded to my survey and has shared their thoughts across the constituency. The case for change is undeniable, and I think, to sum up, what we need to see is collective action and cultural change, and as many contributions have been made across the House today to that effort. Put children and parents first, moving the onus from them and onto social media companies and manufacturers to prove their products are safe, as well as recognising the potential benefits of technology. And before I came to this place, for nearly a decade, I worked in tech, including at Discovery Education, and saw the many benefits that technology has in unlocking the potential of our young people. And I believe that balance is possible, that balance must be found, and I'd like to commend again my honourable friend, the member for Workington and Whitehaven, on bringing this bill forward.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I too wish to say thank you to the honourable member for Whitehaven and Workington for bringing this bill forward. I felt this bill was so important that I was up at 4 o'clock this morning to fly from Northern Ireland to get here to support the member's bill. Our most precious responsibility is safeguarding our children, the very foundation of our society. I stand here today to express my firm support for the protection of the Children's Digital Safety and Data Protection Bill, driven by an unwavering commitment to their safety. Protecting our children in the digital age is a critical undertaking for this Parliament. Failure is simply not an option. The Internet presents an opportunity for immense growth and learning, yet it can also be a dangerous place filled with real threats. The digital realm, with its vast platforms, pose numerous risks. At a recent event I hosted in North Down in my constituency, we explored these issues with cyberbullying, exposure to inappropriate content and predatory behaviour. They are all clear and present dangers our children face daily. I would like to take a moment to recognise those who work tirelessly to protect children, including the dedicated individuals in North Down. Notably, I commend the parents and advocates promoting a smartphone-free childhood. This bill champions a tripartite approach involving government, parents and educators working together to safeguard our youth. We face a stark reality with Ofcom reports that 21% of children aged 5 to 7 use the internet in the UK, a figure that rises dramatically to 89% by the age of 12. I urge everyone to seriously consider these dangers and utilise the excellent resources available, such as smartphone-free-childhood.co.uk. Over 200 schools in Northern Ireland, many in my constituency of North Down, are already benefiting from these efforts. We must distinguish between the positive transformations that technology brings enhancements in learning and communication, and the serious threats it poses. Parliament must ensure that technical companies are held accountable for child protection, achieving the highest standards of safety. Transparency, data privacy and timely content moderation are crucial to maintain and secure online environments. This bill supports a collaborative approach, fostering partnerships between government, industries, leaders, parents, carers and educators. Together we can strive tirelessly to keep our children safe. Let us be proactive, developing ever-evolving tools that protect our children in the digital age. We must support parental control and enhance education about the dangers of the digital world. Being forewarned is being forearmed. Let us aim for a future where a safe online experience is the norm for all our children. This is one of the most significant pieces of work this Parliament will undertake, and further and future generations will thank us all for it. Let's join together in backing this bill to ensure we create a digital landscape that prioritises the safety and well-being of all our children. And while I support the bill, I am slightly disappointed it's been watered down a bit, but you'll have to get that out there. I do believe that children in our primary schools should not have mobiles in the school environments. It leads to our children not learning social interactive skills, distractions with learning and potential online abuse and potential bullying. Children get better academic results when they don't have access to phones in schools. I support the bill and I wish the proposer all the very best, and he has my full support wherever this goes. Thank you.
Katie White. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start off, like others, by thanking the member for Whitehaven and Workington for bringing this private member's bill. There's been many plaudits for him, but a couple of things I'd like to mention to this House is my understanding is he is grounded in evidence-based policy making, and he has focused on issues that are perceived as being very tricky but will have an outsized impact. I've been really warmed by this debate, this cross-party debate. I think, members from South Devon, Reigate, Dulwich and West Normanton, Lowestoft and East Hampshire, and to say that many of us have travelled back to our constituencies and come back, making long journeys. I know some have been on the sleeper train to make this incredibly important debate. I've received twice as much correspondence on this bill than on any other issue this year. Wow. So I want to thank the people of Leeds North West, including the school children, the teachers and parents who have shared their experiences with me. I'd like to make a special mention to Bramhope Primary School, to Benton Park, Ralph Thoresby and to Rawdon St Peters, who shared their stories on our showing leadership. There is, I think, as we've heard from others, a few key issues, and I'll try not to repeat because I know there's many other members that want to get in. I think, look, key for me, as many have said, is that the mental health crisis among our children is profound, and we can see a clear correlation. The NHS England found that 20.3% of 8 to 16-year-olds had a probable mental disorder in 2023. And poor mental health amongst our older teenagers, aged 16 and 17, has increased by more than a quarter since 2017. According to research by UCL and the Sutton Trust, their research finds that almost half, 44% of young people, were above the threshold for probable mental health illness. So we need to be looking for some solutions, and fast. Concerns from teachers and parents were shared alike, and well-being teachers that were put in place are actually spending much time adjudicating battles that are out of their control on WhatsApp. The other thing I found when I spoke to parents and teachers and pupils was that the sense of overwhelm. All of them are overwhelmed. They want to play their full role. Parents want to play their full role, and teachers certainly want to play their full role, but they are completely overwhelmed. Parents feel huge pressure from peers and networks to get it right, and I think many of us who watched the Channel 4 documentary with Emma Willis would see that and feel that sense of overwhelm, trying to navigate. And I agreed with much of what the member for North West Hampshire said, but in terms of that lack of clear guidance was clear from that people were navigating different ways. So I do think that the recommendation will be helpful in this bill. Schools in my constituency said that, again, whilst they're willing to act, they're only responsible for children for 20% of their time. So they cannot control. So it needs to be all of us. We all need to play our part. And the thing that really hits me is the opportunity cost of what else those children can be doing. Screen time has rocketed. In 2009, 5 to 15-year-olds averaged 9 hours on screens per week. It's now jumped between 6 and 9 hours a day. This has replaced critical childhood activities, as we said, like outdoor play, social interactions, hobbies, and learning those essential motor and social skills. Benton Park, in my constituency, recently introduced a phone-free policy during the school day. And when I asked the teachers what happened, they said the vision in the playground is completely different. Where it used to be all heads down, they were actually talking and laughing and playing. The World Health Organization recommends that children aged 2 to 5 should have no more than 1 hour of screen time a day. The new research on excessive screen time looks at the impacts of the prefrontal cortex on the parietal lobe and on the temporal lobe. These are fundamental shifts to the brain development of our children. And my constituent Stevie talked about children arriving at schools with weaker motor and social skills, struggling with basic physical and communication tasks, holding a pencil, using scissors, and that social negotiation. And not to mention the exposure to harmful content that some of my colleagues have referred to. I think many of us were shocked by the Burton review that came only last week of the many dangers, and we have heard this within our constituency. On possibly a less damaging level, I've seen the impact myself of the beauty industry targeting young girls on YouTube. And we've now got these young girls wanting to have these ridiculous skincare regimes. They're marketing high-strength retinol and hyaluronic acid. I mean, I haven't even started using this, so why on earth the 8-year-olds? Perhaps I should. But the need for better regulation of online content aimed at children is absolutely clear. And just to echo the point from my honourable friend around this genie out of the bottle, I find this a very infuriating argument, and many of us will have noticed that a lot of the tech giants don't allow their children to have this access to online media. But in terms of when other addictive products were introduced to the market and we subsequently realised their harm, like my honourable friend said on smoking, did we do nothing? No. We are here to solve problems, not bury our head in the sand and accept the consequences. We already have some of the answers. As my colleague said, there is good, reliable age verification technology, platforms like Yoti that will make this work, and that's why other countries are introducing restrictions with confidence. In fact, we're going to implement this soon with the Online Safety Act. So finally to the bill. I do strongly welcome the role of the UK Chief Medical Officers. Who doesn't want more Chris Whitty in their lives? And schools and parents were calling out for more top-down guidance, and I applaud this effort. I think we have to make sure that our evidence base is at the heart of what we're doing, and I applaud the government for bringing this forward, but I would urge that this is the first step in our actions, and I would ask that, if possibly, the Minister could consider whether we could have some sort of interim update by the summer. It's a crucial moment. I appreciate the 12-month period, but if there was an update by the summer, I think that would be very helpful. Any opportunity we can do to increase the length of childhood of all of our children would be beneficial to all of our constituents and the country. Thank you.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The smartphone is one of the most remarkable pieces of technology ever invented. They keep us connected to the world and allow us to stay in touch with family, friends and colleagues, no matter where we or they are. They give us access to the internet and the immeasurable amount of information that is available online. They give us access to our emails, to allow us to organise our schedules, to do work on the train, even in this chamber. They're also fantastic entertainment hubs, be it music, movies, games, or e-books. Smartphones and the internet have transformed society, and whilst most of this technological progress is good, I believe it has serious consequences for our children. In 2023, Ofcom reported that most children acquire their first smartphone between the ages of 9 and 11. That is problematic, especially when it comes to social media. Social media on smartphones has become an integral part of our children's lives, and it also poses several risks that can have a negative impact on their well-being. One of the biggest concerns is the effect it has on mental health. Constant exposure to curated, idealised versions of others' lives can lead to feelings of inadequacy, anxiety and depression. Teenagers may feel pressured to live up to unrealistic standards, affecting their self-esteem and sense of self-worth. There is also the potential for addiction, with the constant notifications, likes, shares. Social media apps are designed to capture attention and keep users engaged forever. This can lead to excessive screen time, reducing time spent on other important activities like studying, physical exercise and face-to-face interactions, all of which are essential for healthy development. It also affects sleep patterns, and having brought up 2 children, I know how difficult it can be to remove a phone at bedtime. Ultimately, parents are responsible for how they bring up their children. Parents are responsible for deciding whether and when to allow their child to have a smartphone and how long they use it for. But parents need help, and tech companies have a responsibility to ensure that children are not exposed to harmful or addictive product. Social media can also expose teenagers to cyberbullying. Online platforms can be breeding grounds for harmful behaviour, as people feel anonymous and less accountable for their actions. Negative comments, trolling and harassment can take a toll on a teenager's emotional health, sometimes leading to tragic consequences. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was pleased when the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington was successful in the private member's ballot and announced he would introduce a bill to increase the digital age of consent from 13 to 16. So I was surprised when the bill was published, only yesterday, to discover that the very measure he has talked about isn't in the bill. All this bill requires is that the Secretary of State make a statement about whether this age threshold can be raised. Now, why is that? I suspect what may have happened is that the member for Whitehaven and Workington received a visit from one of the government whips. They told him he had a very promising career ahead of him, should he agree to do the right thing and water this legislation down to the point where it doesn't actually do very much at all. Happy to.
MacAlister. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He will know, as many in this House do, that private members' bills are often a shot in the dark. And my aim from the beginning of this process has been, yes, to have the national debate, but also to put all of my energy on landing this with some action and progress. And this is an issue, regardless of party, that has struggled to make progress before. The previous government in 2019, 2021 and 2023 made statements on introducing phone bans in schools, and it never fully materialised. So I think he can agree with me that we can work across the House to get progress on this at every available opportunity in the future.
Yeah. Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful to his intervention, but what I would say is, having spent a great deal of time talking about raising the digital age of consent, having asked my constituents to email me to be present in this House today, specifically to vote for that, rather than being in the constituency and working, I wish he'd presented a bill that said that, because we could have then voted on it and it would have passed. And of course the government might have killed it off at a later stage, but I actually think they might have been too embarrassed to do that. Now, there is nothing in this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, that requires legislation. The Secretary of State could ask the UK's chief medical officers to provide their advice, as Clause 1 requires, and they would do so. And the Secretary of State could publish a plan for research, as required by Section 2, and an assessment, as required by Section 3. So the sad truth is, this bill achieves precisely nothing. And the Honourable Gentleman should be a little bit ashamed of having campaigned so vigorously and then presented this bill. I'm very sorry to say the bill really is very happy to, yes.
Minister.
I'm very grateful. I've seen an awful lot of bills in my time since 2001, and nearly every bill has something in it which doesn't actually need to be in legislation, but is nonetheless put in there as a declaratory statement by the House. And when it has big support, it tends to be something that does affect change. That might very well be the same effect that we have today.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I'd agree with the Minister. Often a bill will contain something that's merely declaratory. Has he ever seen a bill that is wholly declaratory and contains nothing that actually requires legislation? But I would happy to give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, as I think we all know this bill is likely at some point the government seems to be adjourning it. And will his case be made if effectively the case for the adjournment is that the Minister commits that he's going to go and do these things anyway, and therefore the legislation is unnecessary?
Ashley Fox.
My honourable friend makes a very good point. I mean, I maintain this bill is a waste of time. I will vote for it today if we get the opportunity. Unfortunately, I understand it's just going to be adjourned, which suggests the government isn't that serious about taking it forward. But I will vote with a heavy heart, because I really think the honourable gentleman could have achieved so much more if he'd had the courage of his convictions.
John Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm extremely pleased to be able to take part in this debate today, and I thank my honourable friend for bringing the bill forward. It is no exaggeration to say that we are facing a crisis. As already been expertly outlined by members across this House, there is a growing consensus that unregulated smartphone and social media usage is harming our children's health, learning and well-being. Many of the long-term implications for those who have grown up with social media remain unknown, but we can already see the warning signs. The number of children aged 8 to 16 facing a probable mental health disorder has already doubled since 2017. 445,000 people were in contact with children and young people's mental health services in November 2023, up from 362,000 2 years earlier. I recently met with parents in my constituency who are rightly concerned by the impact social media and phone usage is having on their mental health and their sleep and learning of their children. The earlier that children have access to social media, the more pronounced the impacts are on their social development and well-being. Cyberbullying, content designed to make young people feel insecure, and unwanted explicit content are just some of the issues that children now face. Children are losing out on socialising and time spent outside to activities which isolate them and keep them inside. 1/3 of mental health problems in adulthood are directly connected to childhood experiences. Between 2010 and 2018, the number of young people attending A&E with a psychiatric condition more than tripled. The COVID period exacerbated the social and mental health impacts of smartphone and social media use, but the issues we now face have been in the making for more than a decade. And failure to hold the tech companies accountable and provide the necessary mental health support for our young people has now created a perfect storm for the crisis we are now facing. We mustn't treat smartphone and social media addiction as a natural phenomenon. Tech companies have created systems intended precisely to be addictive and maximise the time users spend on their phones. Currently, more than 1 in 4 young adults show signs of behavioural addiction to smartphones. The algorithms and user interface of social media sites are designed to be addictive, targeting dopamine circuits in the brain. Research shows that some social media apps can trigger brain responses similar to slot machine gambling. Right now, many parents are forced into an impossible position, with a choice between letting the children access potentially harmful and addictive content or feeling that their child is isolated and left out from their peers. The impacts on mental health and learning are especially pronounced for vulnerable young people who may already lack the support they need at school and in the community. And we can't ignore the political impacts of unregulated social media either. It is incredibly concerning to see extremist content being pushed to young people who are increasingly isolated. Many of these young people spend less time with their friends and less time in physical community spaces. Last year we saw Australia's government move to take serious action on these issues, banning children under 16 from using social media and having the power to fine companies who fail to comply. It is clear that we have a very long way to go, but this bill is a positive step and will help to build the national conversation that is needed to tackle the scale of these problems. I just wanted to finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a quote from a parent of a child who took his own life. The parent, Chris, filed lawsuits against 2 tech giants, and this is a quote I've seen in an article in the New Yorker magazine from October 2024. He said, "I thought I was a good and responsible father. I checked around the house and locked the doors every night, making everything nice and safe. I didn't understand that the lion was already inside the house."
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to speak today in support of the Safer Phones Bill, and I speak as a mother of 4 teenagers who goes into battle almost every day on screen time, as a governor of 8 years at a local school who has seen the damage that screens can do to young people's mental health, and as a member of this place who might be able to do something to turn the tide on the damage to our young people who are being used as guinea pigs in the rapid advance of technology. We are well into the tech revolution. It will change everything, and it is a force for good. But just like previous industrial revolutions, there are victims. Then too were the children in factories powering that revolution, and now today our children need protection against this tsunami of tech and its attendant harms. This bill, as originally intended, was a crucial step in safeguarding the well-being of our children in our digital world, and I want to sincerely thank the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington for all his work to date in his campaign for a safer smartphone use for children. And as many Honourable Members have pointed out here already, the evidence before us is undeniable, and I won't rehearse them. I just want to pull out a few points. 2.5 million children in the UK are using social media underage, and before, crucially, they have developed the necessary skills to navigate complex and risky online environments. Extended screen time has also spiked rapidly and become the norm for most young people. And as I want to commend the report of the Education Select Committee, which revealed that nearly a quarter of children now use smartphones in a way that's consistent with a behavioural addiction. And screen use starts for some as early as 6 months of age, and by the time children reach 12 years old, nearly all have a smartphone. So social media and mobile applications are not just tools for communication. Many are inherently addictive by design, engineered to keep users engaged whatever the cost, and I know this from my children, and I'd like to underscore the words of many of the honourable members here today on the addictive nature and the battles that parents have. It is causing huge pressure on parents who are doing battle with addictive algorithms, which they can't possibly win. So the initial provisions in this bill are ones I wholeheartedly support, and so did hundreds of my constituents in Esher and Walton who wrote to me in support of the campaign behind the bill, and while I continue to support it, I must express disappointment that it's been significantly watered down. What could have been a bold step in child protection has been reduced to mere provisions for government research commitments and guidance revisions, actions that do not require legislation. And we know that the government has already committed to commissioning academic research on smartphone use last autumn, but partly in response to the very welcome campaign brought about by the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Working. And we already have overwhelming evidence that we've heard today supporting stronger regulation. So really, how much more evidence does the government need? Head teachers across my constituency and parent groups across Molesey, Esher, Walton, Easton and Hampshire have convened local campaigns with nearly 1,000 signatories for parliamentary petitions on this issue, expressing huge concerns about excessive smartphone use, unregulated social media and the inadequacy of current regulations. And I know that schools in my constituency were particularly encouraged by initial indications that this bill would make requirements for schools to be mobile free and to receive government support as they seek to enforce effective and safe learning spaces. In fact, the head teacher of Esher High School, Andy King, illustrated to me just how much creative problem-solving teachers are having to adopt in order to keep children focused on learning, when they are walking around with such an addictive invention right in their pockets. His school has been compelled to enforce a closed backpacks only rule, as opposed to open bags like handbags, just so the children aren't distracted by seeing a notification pop up in their open bags in class. And all head teachers I met in my constituency talk about the inattention caused by phones and inability to focus on a whole book. And research, as we've heard, shows that it can take up to 20 minutes for pupils to refocus after engaging in non-academic digital activity. The rise in screen time has also been linked to decline in attention levels, language skills, and sleep quality. So it's both a learning distraction and a serious health concern. And as we mark and celebrate International Women's Day tomorrow, we also shouldn't ignore how children's access to smartphones can undermine healthy relationships and the safety and well-being of women and girls. And the Children's Commissioner for England found that 79% of children had encountered violent pornography before the age of 18, with the average age of first exposure being just 13 years old. And I know of a constituent whose child saw extreme pornography at 13 and was so traumatised in an effort to clear his mind that he developed OCD. We also know that online sexual crimes against children have risen by 400% since 2013, and for girls aged 7 to 21, a staggering 81% have experienced some form of threatening or upsetting behaviour online. So I appreciate what the Honourable Member has done to build the case for government action, but it's a pity that we are not going to be able to test the will of Parliament for a much more ambitious approach to online safety from this government than we have at the present. So, turning to the Minister, I know the Secretary of State has already expressed frustration with gaps in the Online Safety Act and its implementation, yet this bill could have been used to make some urgent amendments to it. Why has the government not used that opportunity, particularly when the Secretary of State has indicated there will be no new legislation coming along anytime soon? So I urge the government to stop hiding behind endless reviews and take concrete steps to protect young people now. Two specifically. The first is to ensure that there is a requirement on services to ensure minimum age limits on their platforms. Unfathomably, Ofcom's draft children's codes do not impose an obligation on regulated services to enforce their own terms of service on the minimum age of users on their platforms. This is something that children's charities argued for in consultation with these codes and have campaigned on ever since. Ofcom is not listening, and the government is doing nothing to address this. This bill could and should have been used as a means to plug that gap, regardless of what additional evidence the government feels it needs before it makes any further policy or legislative commitments. So will the government commit to do so? And the second is the issue that has emerged in the last couple of months with Meta's announcement that it is removing protections for vulnerable users from its content moderation policies. There is no mechanism in the Online Safety Act to prevent regulated services rolling back protections in their terms of service, and there is no minimum standards set for these either. This means that even for children under the Online Safety Act, there is no prohibition on platforms reducing standards either. Platforms can keep rolling back on their user safety protections until they hit the level that is harmful for children. This can't be right, but it can be fixed with an amendment to the Online Safety Act. Will the government agree to use this bill to do so? This bill could have been a vehicle for real policy action. But although the provisions of the bill are not as powerful as I initially hoped, some progress is better than none, so I will be supporting it. But I urge my colleagues across this House not only to just support this bill, but to push for the stronger, bolder reforms that our children desperately need. And to say that it is inevitable is not enough. Every day we wait is another day with a child spending 18 hours online, potentially at grave risk. And I urge the government and us all to act.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I start by thanking the member for Whitehaven and Workington for bringing this bill forward. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the bill and to have worked with you on it and to have worked with the member on it. I also want to thank the member in giving us all a chance to speak in what is potentially the most engaged chamber we have ever seen, as we all grapple with the hypocrisy mentioned by the member for Reigate as to whether or not, even in this debate, can we be on our smartphones. So I'm sure we've all been listening very attentively. So what were you all doing when you were collectively in school back in the midst of time? If I think back to the early 2000s, when I was in school, I'd go out afterwards, calling ahead on the home phone to see whether my friends were in. We didn't have smartphones when I was in school. It wasn't that recent. During the summer holidays, the rule was that you had to be at home before the street lights came on. And I remember playing out in front of the local shops day after day in the long summers. But now, if you think of children today and the childhood that they will have, imagine playing their favourite game, but with a device in their pocket, buzzing every minute, telling them that someone has responded to their latest Instagram post, or if all of their friends are checking their phones too. The game starts to feel a little bit different, and instead of enjoying independent play outside, today's children and young people are spending hour upon hour of their free time glued to their screens, Madam Deputy Speaker. The average British 12-year-old is now estimated to spend something between 20 and 30 hours a week online, while the nation's green spaces sit increasingly empty. So that's why I believe this issue is one where the well-being of a generation is at stake. As other members have mentioned, the trends that have emerged since young children started to get their own smartphones just a decade ago are very concerning. I'm worried about the heartbreaking rise in suicide and self-harm, rising depression and anxiety, online bullying, the things that children get exposed to through the devices in their pockets, and about the 46% of teenagers who say that they are using their phone almost constantly. I'm worried about the risk from traffic or muggers to kids who walk to and from school staring at their phones, and the evidence that shows it has a negative impact during the school day. And it's not just tired old dads like me who are concerned. 4 in every 5 16 to 24-year-olds say that social media has become addictive in the last 5 years. And most heartbreaking of all, if you ask Gen Z whether life would be better or worse with social media, only 18% of girls in this group say that it would be worse if social media was switched off entirely. The vast majority think that their lives would be better without it. I was radicalised over the summer after being first elected on the 4th of July, Madam Deputy Speaker, by reading Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, and I decided then to reach out to Smartphone Free Childhood and my local campaign team, led by a fantastic resident called Nova Eden, to work to try and get every single school in my constituency and in my borough to go smartphone free. I met with primary school heads about this last year. Every single one of them said that they were 10 out of 10 concerned about this issue. So we've worked really hard, and I'm really proud that the borough that I have the honour of being one of the members of Parliament for will be going smartphone free from September this year. Every single primary school, 103 primaries, have signed up, and the secondary schools are following suit too. I want to commend the work of teachers and parents, fantastic people who want to do the best by their children in our borough, and I do hope that the measures in this bill can be taken forward to help children have the best start in life that they can, and so that we can make sure that we protect the well-being of future generations.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I often say that I would not like to be a teenager today growing up with the environment dominated by social media. I mean, it was bad enough by the time I got to secondary school that everyone did have a phone, and then by the time I left secondary school, everyone had a smartphone. There is no doubt that the threats to children in our country have been utterly transformed in just the last decade, and therefore we need to transform how we address those issues in this place. So I certainly support the thrust of the bill presented before us today. The government must treat children's use of digital devices and social media as a health issue. Children are spending more and more of their lives on social media at younger and younger ages. Those aged 12 to 15 spend on average 35 hours a week on their smartphone. Yes, 35 hours a week. And we know that poor mental health has spiked amongst young people in the last 15 years. But I do have some concerns about the proposal before us today. Whilst I fully respect the member for Whitehaven and Workington's intentions for the bill and passion for the issue, I am frustrated that it does not seek to make any changes to the current situation. It places a duty on the Secretary of State to publish a plan for research into the impact of the use of social media within 12 months. And just on that specific point, just in general, I think this is where the public get really frustrated with Parliament and politicians about the fact that we're going to say we're going to do some research or we're going to have a meeting. I think the public want to see action in lots of the areas that we speak about in this place. And there has been a massive consensus for the work that the Honourable Member has done by bringing forward this bill today from all sides of the Chamber. And I think there is a consensus from those who have spoken today about the need to go further and faster on this issue, and I will certainly be supporting the member in doing that. But the bill does just contain a feeble instruction. For parents and kids struggling now, would they be comforted by the publication of merely a plan for research into the topic as far away as the middle of 2026? Indeed, the government, as we have already heard, has established a research project and it's due to report its findings in May. So do we really need to add to the statute book to ask the government to do this? I also fear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this bill will simply outsource decision-making to others rather than allowing the elected Parliament, parents and children themselves to contribute to a policy solution on this issue. Rather than publishing a plan for research in the next 12 months, would it not be better if the government came forward with a proposal, for example, increasing the digital age of consent to this Parliament so we could debate it? Also, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill mentions consultation with Ofcom and the Information Commissioner. It should be members of Parliament representing families in our constituencies that ultimately make a decision on the right course of action. So I hope, if this bill does pass, that Parliament will be consulted before any changes are made. We can all agree that there is a serious problem affecting society and younger generations as a whole. But because we can all agree on that, I believe we need to see firm proposals from the government coming forward, not just more research. And I completely concurred with what my honourable friend, the member for Reigate, said earlier. I will not be standing on these benches often calling for government intervention in issues, but this issue has become so great to lots of members in our society that I feel that we do need to legislate in this area, because it has been quite clear over the short to medium term that social media companies have failed to step up and do more, because they could do more without legislation. They could be more proactive about it. They have failed to do that. So I do think the time is now right. And hopefully what we can take away from today is the fact that we have had a debate, the fact that we have aired some of those grievances around the harms that social media does to younger generations in this country. And hopefully, by the time this proposal comes back within 12 months, social media companies, I hope, and I do live in hope, that they've solved some of the issues and worked harder and faster in the fear that legislation is coming. And I hope legislation will come. And I think we all have skin in the game. My sister has recently given birth. I'm now an uncle, so I do have skin in the game. So we have got to act, because I fear if we don't act, we will let down not only generations that are coming through the education system now, we will let down future generations, like my niece, that haven't even started in the education system. So I fully support lots of comments in the House today, but I do urge the member, please keep going and come forward and help the government come forward with some stern proposals on this issue, because I do believe, as I've said, there is cross-party support amongst everyone that's spoken today that we need to go faster to solve this issue and hopefully save future generations that are coming through the education system and wider society. Thank you.
Lola McAvoy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to the work of my honourable friend for
the member for Whitehaven and Workington. It's been an honour to work alongside you on this crucial issue. So, tackling online safety for children in our country is a diamond issue. It's rare, it's popular, it's tough, and getting it right will deliver on what is our most precious responsibility, the protection of our children. We, as a society, have a duty to protect our children from predators, from each other, from themselves, and from harm. The contrast between the reasons not to legislate further and the reasons to take action now could not be starker in quality, in my opinion. The argument is one: we must go further than the current reading of the Online Safety Act in order to protect our children's right to a safe and healthy childhood. So I'm going to use my time on this floor in this debate to talk a little bit about why I care about it, a little bit about the work that's already been done, and then a little bit about how we need to go further and act now. So, a long, long, long time ago, I was 11 years old, and Titanic, the movie, was coming out, and I'm sure you'll all remember it was a huge box office hit. I was desperate to see it, but as an 11-year-old, it was rated at age 12, and my parents told me that I wasn't allowed. I love drama and history and Leonardo DiCaprio, and I was incensed at the injustice that I wasn't allowed to watch it because all of my friends were. It's outrageous. I gave my parents hell on the issue. I tried every persuasion technique available to me, and I still wasn't allowed. Now, I do still love history and drama, and Leo less so, but the reason I'm talking about this is because I wasn't really upset about not being able to see the film. I was scared of being left out from my peer group. And this is the key issue that parents bring up in Darlington. They say to me so frequently that the pressure to give their child a smartphone when they're not sure if they're safe is overwhelming. And so it's time for us to help them answer some of the questions that they're asking. They need stronger legislation and guidance from government about what is safe for their children to do online. Should their children be allowed a phone? If so, when? Should they post pics of them online? Should they be allowed to use the chats on games? Should they be allowed social media profiles? Should they limit their screen time? These are all questions that require answers, and the parents want them from us. Parents, as we know, will always know what's best for their children, but they often disagree with their parenting styles, and that can be a cause of contention in peer groups and in schools, and it can be a clash of values amongst many other things. It's normal. The issue is not about parenting styles and choices, because parents are united across the country, as we've heard today from everybody's contribution, that they need more action and guidance from legislators. Over the course of this campaign, I've become convinced without any reasonable doubt that more legislation is needed, that the public support that, and that Ofcom's reading of the Online Safety Act is unnecessarily narrow, and the first iterations of the children's codes that are coming out are not strong enough to protect our children. It's accepted that even the strongest legislation will take time to bed in and will be imperfect, so let's go further now. I want to lay out the reasons that I still support the measures proposed in the original bill by my dear and honourable friend, the member for Whitehaven and Workington. So the first measure: should children have phones in schools? Teachers don't think so, children know they shouldn't, and evidence from schools where the phones were banned have seen sickness absence in teachers reduced, have seen attendance in children go up, and have seen behaviour improve. When I was first elected, I started an online safety forum in Darlington with 2 children from year 10 in every school in the town. Brought them all together and asked them what the big issues were for them, and they said peer-to-peer bullying was above and beyond the biggest issue. Peer-to-peer bullying exacerbated by the use of smartphones in and outside of school and their online activity. They said to me that people were using their phones to film each other and then send them round, attacking each other and bullying each other, and it was causing a big mental health issue. So we know, or I feel it's hard to argue against the rationale that schools should be for learning. Yeah, I will give way.
When she's making an impassioned speech, does she agree with me that social media has made bullying in some cases 24 hours a day, because it means that it can happen at any point, even when a child is no longer at school?
Because that is exactly the case. You know, being 14 is hard, being at school is tough, there's always been bullying, and it's unreasonable and unrealistic to say that we'll completely eradicate that as legislators. But what's happening is that children used to be able to go home and be protected from what was going on at school, and that's no longer the case. So we have to do everything we can to give them some time off their phones in school. So I do think there's no case for children to have their smartphones in schools, and I think most teachers and head teachers agree with that as well. The next point on the bill is the age of digital consent from 13 to 16. This is absolutely necessary. Children deserve a right to anonymity throughout their childhood, and a right not to have a digital footprint when they come of age. I absolutely support the age of digital consent lifting from 13 to 16. I think the sooner we do that, the better. Addictive by design content, even arguing against this, I can't understand and fathom how there is any argument that children should be exposed to addictive by design algorithms and content on social media. I just don't know who would possibly argue that that was a good idea. Our job is to protect children, and it's... I will.
I share her concern about the addictive nature of social media. Is she also concerned about the addictive nature of gambling type games that we're seeing young children use, with loot boxes, microtransactions, and the encouragement of young people to get into this gambling mindset through technology at the moment?
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I think there are a lot of changing and moving parts in the online platform and in the online world, and it's really hard for legislators to keep up. We're already lagging way behind where we need to be. So what we need in that point I will address later on in my speech, and it's a dynamic risk assessment. So when new innovations come online and we see children using them, that they would be risk assessed in real time and prevented against children against coming into harm. So the next point is marketing to children. Obviously, this needs to be kept in line with new societal trends to protect children from being targeted for sales. It's quite clear. So I stand by the original measures in the bill, and I'm confident that this is not the end of this campaign. The Honourable Friend for Whitehaven and Workington and I first met as candidates for the Labour Party when we were both shocked at how cross-cutting children's safety online was as an issue to our constituents. When he asked me to be a co-sponsor of this bill, I said, of course, but I asked that he please engage with the Bereaved Families for Online Safety Group, as I'd heard about the work they were doing and had a huge amount of respect for them. He agreed, we invited them to Parliament, and the argument that there is a moral panic over children's online safety is so utterly offensive that I can't overstate how upsetting it is for people in that group and around the country who have really serious concerns about their children's safety online. So I want to put on record in this chamber my unequivocal support and respect for this group and of parents across the country who've lost their children. Their stories are all the evidence I need to know that we as a government must go further. So Ellen Room, Jules Sweeney's mother, has been campaigning for the right of bereaved parents to have access to their children's accounts in the event of their death to search for answers. I strongly support a further amendment to the data bill which will make it automatic that in the instance of a sudden unexplained child's death, Ofcom will be notified immediately and a data notice will be sent to the online regulated platforms to freeze the child's accounts from deletion. This would protect against any other parents having to go through the awful process that Ellen has had to endure to try and find answers. And on Ellen's case and many of the cases of bereaved families, I urge the platforms that are being contacted by them to please engage and adhere to their requests for the children's data. These people have lost their children. Do the decent thing and help them find answers.
Will she give way?
I will give way on that point.
My honourable friend and I were both present at an event with bereaved parents organised by my honourable friend for Whitehaven Workington, where a number of the social media companies were present. The children had taken their lives and had been very active on platforms used by those companies. I wonder if she shared my dismay at the reaction from the social media companies who were in that room and the fact they made it very clear that they did not understand the responsibility they held for the harm that they were causing.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. It's been a very interesting process being part of this campaign, and I think there is a lot more to do on that issue. So there are other areas that we must urgently take action on, from going forward with the second iteration of the children's codes to make sure that functionalities are included, to upgrading the requirement for risk assessments to make them more dynamic, and to supporting these bereaved families. But to conclude, I'm incredibly grateful to all of those who've supported this bill. My honourable friend for his incredible work, Ben Kingsley for his excellent expertise, and to my wonderful constituents in Darlington who've put me here to represent them, improve their lives and help them protect their children. This Christmas, just gone, I was at a carol concert at the Crown Street Library in Darlington, and a man tapped me on the shoulder and pointed at his beautiful child who was looking up at me and beaming, and he said, "Keep going on the online safety, you're doing it for her." I am, and I will continue to do so, and I urge our government to get on with it and take as much action as we can within reason. What is reasonable in the time frame that we have. Thank you.
Yeah. I call Shadow Minister Dr Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to speak on behalf of His Majesty's official opposition on this important topic. And thank you for bringing me now. I'm not going to speak for too long because there are so many members opposite who are very keen to take part in this important debate. I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member opposite for Whitehaven and Workingham for bringing this private member's bill to the House, and all the different people, companies, charities, organisations who he's worked with as part of this campaign to drive this forwards. I do feel for him, as I know the challenges of having ballot bills. I've had two myself, and navigating that as a backbench Member of Parliament in the party of government, and trying to use private members' bills as a campaign vehicle to drive forwards change in this area. So I hope he'll forgive me for some of my comments I shall make regarding the content of the bill before us. We can only deal with the bill as we have in front of us today, and the text of the bill was only published in the past few days. So my comments today necessarily reflect the detail of the Honourable Member's proposals, which have only just been made clear. And in a sense, this debate sort of reminds me of Schrodinger's cat. It's been a sort of Schrodinger's cat debate where references to a former bill and current bill have been made equally through speeches. So it feels like we have a sort of a debate on a bill which could have been, and a debate on the bill in front of us. Indeed, the Honourable Member's speech speaks to the lack of need for further research, but equally the bill calls for further research to take place. We've had some fantastic contributions on all sides of the House. I'd just like to note the contributions from North West Hampshire, Reigate, East Hampshire, Bridgwater and Broxbourne, which reiterated this theme of the importance of driving forwards change in this area, and many stories shared, personal declarations shared about the impact of social media and difficulty parenting at this time. I should declare I'm also a parent, although thankfully my children aren't at the stage where they've started consuming social media in the way that I've heard other people talk about today. Of course.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He's making a powerful point about the debate and how it's dwelled in part on the importance of evidence and research. Would he agree with me that we have so much evidence because we speak as MPs with so many children? I have in my hand here letters from children in Year 5 and Year 6 at St James's C.of.E. Primary Academy, and if I read briefly from Eleanor and River, they say kids will always be exposed to inappropriate content such as unsuitable videos and pictures. They could feel unsafe, discouraged or exposed, and then they would not be able to unsee the images again. Does he agree with me that we should be shielding children like this from this sort of content?
Well, I thank him for his intervention. I'm going to resist the temptation of being drawn into a discussion about research methodology in this area, and I have to tell him I'm very tempted to start talk about the importance of case series data, qualitative data in terms of what people are telling us, what we're seeing ourselves, compared to cross-sectional or longitudinal studies, or cluster studies looking at the impact of different schools. I'm going to really resist that. But what I will say, but of course, I mean, the stories that we've heard and what we've We hear from our constituents, and we've heard in this debate today, of what children are exposed to is absolutely horrific. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, and clearly we need to protect children from that. At the heart of this bill is the desire to drive forward our scientific understanding of the effects on children's mental health, learning and social development of smartphone and social media use. I hope that there is a commitment, when we hear from the Minister, hopefully, to conduct a detailed review in this complex area where so much is at stake. But I'd expand it out broader. Any analysis must take a clear-eyed approach to both the advantages and disadvantages that technological developments such as smartphones and internet access offer, the benefits to young people of increased connectivity, access to information, and even apps that manage health conditions like diabetes when in school and away from home, which will transform the lives of children and young people. But clearly, there is an increasing body of research demonstrating damaging effects of excessive smartphone and social media use on children and adolescents. Go for it.
Would he agree with me that it's so important that in schools we move towards smartphone-free schools? And I'd like to welcome the work done in Monmouthshire, my constituency, where the head teacher of Monmouth Comprehensive is pushing forward such a ban because grades increase by almost 2 levels where schools have banned mobile phones.
Well, I'm going to come to that a little bit later in my speech. Perhaps members opposite will have the chance to express a view on this when the Children Wellbeing Bill comes back to Parliament for report stage in a couple of weeks' time. Going back to my points on the research, a longitudinal study in the US of over 6,500 children aged between 12 to 15, adjusted for baseline mental health status, found that adolescents who spent more than 3 hours per day on social media faced double the risk of experiencing poor mental health outcomes, including symptoms of depression and anxiety. These findings were brought into sharp focus by the tragic recent cases of children taking their own lives after having been the subject of online bullying or encountering harmful material online, and clearly that weighs on all of us as legislators. During the previous government and now in opposition, this side of the House has pursued measures to make the online world a safer place for children and young people. I'm proud that the previous government brought into legislation the Online Safety Act, amongst other measures to make the online world safer. This Act requires platforms to take measures to prevent children from accessing harmful and age-inappropriate content, particularly content relating to pornography, suicide and self-harm, serious violence and bullying. And further, the Act requires platforms to remove illegal content quickly and to prevent it appearing in the first place, and to use and enforce age-checking measures on platforms where content harmful to children is published through the adoption of highly effective age assurance technologies. In January, Ofcom published industry guidance on how it expects age assurance to be put into effect, including deadlines for platforms to conduct risk assessments and to put certain safety measures in place. We can expect to see further developments in this area as the protections envisaged by the OSA are rolled out. However, parents, including so many in my own constituency of Runnymede and Weybridge, are also rightly concerned about the addictive nature of smartphones themselves and the impact this can have on attention span and social development. According to polling from Parentkind in 2024, 83% of parents felt that smartphones are harmful to children and young people. Research carried out by the Policy Exchange across over 200 schools at the end of 23 found that schools with strict mobile phone bans achieved, on average, better Progress 8 scores and better GCSE grades. This was despite the fact that schools with highly effective bans in the study had a high proportion of pupils eligible for free school meals than schools with less restrictive policies. Now, in February, the Shadow Minister of Education tabled an amendment to the Children Wellbeing in Schools Bill to require all schools in England to ban the use of mobile telephones during the school day. This, however, was rejected by the government. I wonder how members opposite feel about that. Should the government decide in this, perhaps further to the Chief Medical Officer's review, we on the side of this House will work constructively with them to seek practical and effective solutions which enable children to continue to benefit from the opportunities offered online while protecting them from its harmful effects.
Sam Carling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to contribute briefly. As the youngest MP, I've seen a lot of this happening throughout my own time going through the school system. I have reams and reams of positive things to say about this bill, which I'm not going to have time to say, so I just want to say very briefly that I welcome it hugely. There's a couple of points I want to focus on that haven't been covered so much around the debate. Actually around the benefits that some social media can bring, and therefore I would argue the need for us to be careful and regulate it in the right way to make sure that we don't lose some of those, or that we're able to bring them in other forms. Article 16 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child talks about children's right to privacy, and we have, in my view, to try and strike a balance between parents' ability to know what their children are doing online and who they're speaking to, which is incredibly important for safeguarding, with the need for young people to have access to private spaces sometimes. And the example I particularly have in mind is one of LGBT people, young LGBT people in families who aren't as accepting of them. Because when someone in that situation is starting to understand their sexuality, which often happens around the age we're talking about, that kind of 13 to 16 area, sometimes being able to find people in online communities going through similar experiences can provide an incredibly valuable support network that they otherwise wouldn't have. And similarly, some members will know, grew up in a high-control religious group, and I was very lucky in that I went to a mainstream school, but lots of others aren't. They're kept in sort of more secluded environments and have very little contact with the outside world, and again, having a bit of an ability to find support networks outside can be very valuable, so I'm keen that we make sure that we maintain that. But the emphasis has got to be on social media companies to up their game enormously in how they regulate online spaces, because so much is going under the radar and needs to be addressed in terms of safeguarding. I'm particularly struck by the fact that there are some apps out there aimed at young people between sort of 13 to 17, which portray themselves as forums to make friends around the world, new friends around the world. And they do it based on swiping left and right on profiles, based on photos or bios and interests, which, as everyone will notice immediately, sounds a lot like dating apps. And actually, some of these apps are being used for that purpose by young people, and it's incredibly alarming and something we've got to get on top of. And it's made particularly more severe by the fact that some of them can sort of match with people who are a significant age difference to them, and it's very much unacceptable and flying under the radar. So there are enormously significant issues in this space to do with social media for young people, and I very much welcome this bill bringing forward an opportunities for us to get some of the research in place and look at how we can address that properly.
Freddie Van Mierlo.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I was growing up, we were first becoming aware of the digital world. Coming home from school, I would log into MSN Messenger, check MySpace, carefully arrange the 10 top friends on that platform, and check out online games. Now these early tools have been honed to be as addictive as possible. Social media is a space for unchecked bullying and a place for predators to hide. I got my first phone aged 13, but the most advanced technology on it was an FM radio. Today, phones are not phones at all. They are super computers in our pockets. No parent wants their child to be left out. Once that first child in a class gets a phone, the floodgates open. We need to give schools and parents the tools to overcome this collective action problem. I will give way.
Schools, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. On schools, will he join me in congratulating Fulham Boys' School in my constituency of Chelsea and Fulham, which was the first school in the country to replace smartphones with brick phones, and as a result has seen pupils more engaged, better social interactions and improved classroom behaviour? And does he agree that they set an example for our country to follow?
Happily join him in congratulating that school. But unfortunately what we've seen today is a tragedy of the commons. With a weakening of this legislation, we couldn't overcome the collective action problem even in this chamber to deliver a tougher regulation. And we need that tougher regulation to stop the misuse of technology and keep the next generation safe. Not reviews and a promise to plan research. I am happy to see other members of this House contribute to this conversation today, but I note that Reform, including the member for Clacton, have decided not to grace us with their presence. If they cared so much for the protection of our children, they would be here. In conversations I've had with friends of school-aged children, I learned of apps like Roblox that allow any person to open a conversation with another user of the game. I also heard from campaigners of how even Spotify can be used to share explicit images and conduct online grooming. I talked to parents in Henley and Tame, distraught that their children who were groomed by predators over social media. However, when reported to the police of the crime, they were told that there is nothing that could be done because a virtual private network was used. Technology is consistently evolving and we must keep informed of its developments. Parents must be informed of the risks facing children using social media, and there is a way forward. We are all aware that social media companies are making huge profits on this activity, including introducing a social media levy to increase tax on these companies is an obvious choice. Tax collected from here could then be used to support children to fund mental health services. Social media is causing a detrimental impact on child well-being, the least of which we can do is use its profits to mitigate some of the damage. Secondly, the digital age of consent must be increased to 16. 13 is too young for a child to consent to the collection and processing and storing of their data. This wouldn't ban children under 16 from using social media, but force social media companies to make applications safer and child-friendly for those under 16. I have a daughter, she is just 14 months old, but already she is being targeted by shows that seek to manipulate babies' brains and avoid losing their attention during those shows. It shows just how pernicious this online space has become. And I fear what the online space will look like in 10 years' time. And as a father, we must act... yes, I'll give way.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving way. May I just urge us all, as we sit here, because I feel like this point hasn't come across, and I'd ask if you agree with me, that we all meet in our constituencies the most incredible young people every day, and we must congratulate young people for the amazing things they do.
Interventions need to be very, very short at this point, and also please do not refer to each other as you. Freddie Van Morella.
I join her in congratulating young people and their work. As a father, we must act now to reduce the harm to current generations of children and say we must never again expose future generations to those harms.
And I call Joe Powell.
Deputy Speaker, and in the brief time available, I just want to again reinforce what my tribute to the honourable friend for Whitehaven and Workington for his excellent work in leading this bill, which I've been proud to co-sponsor. In the hearings over the past few months, it has been eye-opening to see face-to-face the parents and campaigners with those tech executives, regulators and others who have either been unwilling or unable to act to tackle this problem head-on. I just want to pass on three messages to the Minister in the 2 minutes I have. Firstly, on health, a recent event we had in Kensington and Bayswater with local campaigners. A doctor shocked the room when she said amongst her peers, her paediatrician peers, that the impact of excessive phone use and social media on children is now the single main health concern that they have. Not pollution, not smoking, not diet. It is this issue we've debated today that most worries paediatricians today. And while there will always be calls for more evidence, more causality and so on and so forth, it is time, as others have said, that we flip that narrative. We should challenge those that want to go slow on this issue to come up with any alternative plausible cause of the recent mental health trends. And we know next week in this House we'll be discussing the huge rise in incapacity benefit, including people with mental health challenges. If we want to tackle that issue, we have to tackle root causes like the one we're discussing today. It won't only fail our children, but our future prosperity. In the last 30 seconds, one story of hope. Andrew O'Neill, headmaster at All Saints Catholic College in North Kensington, head teacher of the year recently, when he saw what happened post-COVID with that toxic combination of isolation and smartphone addiction, he extended the school day. He made it 12 hours, a voluntary 12-hour school day with breakfast at 7 a.m.
evening study classes, cooking, extracurricular activities supervised in the evening, and he has managed to break that cycle. That is a pioneering head, but I want that for every child in the country, not just those students. And the final word is to my constituent at Zainab, who's been here watching all day. She said to me, "You're going back to check a message, but suddenly you've fallen into the black hole of posts, YouTube videos and endless scrolling. Next thing you know, 2 hours have passed, you've done nothing productive." And she asks, is this truly the future we want for our children? Will we look back and regret it? Her message is, young people want control over their screens, not the other way around, and they need our help to make that happen now.
Yeah. I call the Minister, Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will first of all just run through some of the contributions that have been made in the debate, and then I'll come to the specific answers to some of the points that have been made, if I might. But first of all, I think I'll probably have the unanimous support of the House in praising my honourable friend for Whitehaven and Workington. I'm slightly worried that he was referred to as the patron saint earlier, and because the danger with patron saint is they tend to be martyred at some point in their career, and I don't wish that for him. I'm not going to make any of the arguments, as I said earlier, I'm not going to make any of the arguments that he told me not to make, because I don't subscribe to them. And also, I'm not going to make any arguments today against action. I think that that's an important point that the House needs to recognise, that everybody accepts that action is inevitable in this sphere. The honourable member for my honourable friend for Dulwich and West Norwood gave us some shocking statistics from her own constituency, and many others have today. The honourable member for Reigate, who I'm afraid is not in her place at the moment, but she said, oh, sorry, I missed her. Sorry, I wouldn't want to mislead the House. She fessed up, basically, to her own social media use, but she didn't tell us how many hours a day it is. So we were watching her throughout the debate just to see how much of the time she was spending on social media. But it's absolutely true that, of course, many of us are just as addicted as many of the young people. And this is, whilst our specific concern is about children and the mental health effects, of course there are issues for the whole of society, not least some of the other members referred to misinformation and how that's propagated and how you access good, reliable information in a world which is profoundly chaotic and where algorithms don't necessarily subscribe to truth in the way that previous understandings of the media used to, then there are issues for the whole of society. And I note that she said that the state must step in. We will hold her to that on many more occasions in the future. My honourable friend for Lowestoft made some very important points about sometimes it's the most vulnerable children that we're talking about because that the effect can be on the most vulnerable children. She also pointed, as several others did, to the desensitising effect of boys in particular seeing particular versions of sex online, which it feels like it normalises a set of expectations of about what a relationship with another person might be and what sex might involve that is wholly alien, I think, to most people's understanding of what that should be. My honourable friend for Beckenham and Penge made the point that was made in the previous debate that we had about this in Westminster Hall about the question of the burden of proof and whether the burden of proof lies with those trying to prove that there is no harm or with those that are trying to prove that there is harm. I will in one moment. I think it's important that we look at the evidence in the round and we come to coherent, sensible, one government decision on how we can progress in this field. Of course, I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for giving way. Does he agree with a wiser person than me that said that our psychology is Neolithic, our institutions are from the Middle Ages, and our technology is of today, and that we have got to get better at being able to engage with it?
Well, I think it was John Prescott who said something about ancient values in a modern setting or something like that. And I think that that's what we need to secure, which is the liberty of the individual at the same time as the protection of the vulnerable. And that's precisely what we need to be able to adopt as we move forward. My honourable friend from Leeds North West made the point that she's had twice as much correspondence on this subject as on any other this year. and made what I think is a really important point, which doesn't only apply to this, but to many other areas where we work with young people, which is it's very important, if we possibly can, to be able to extend the years of childhood that a child gets to enjoy. Many years ago, I wrote a report about teenage pregnancy in my own constituency, and that's another aspect of trying to make sure that where children delay their first sexual experience, it's almost certainly better for them and leads to better personal, social and other outcomes. The member for Derbyshire Dales made the point about children attending A&E with psychiatric conditions. Now, I would urge him just to be slightly cautious about the statistics here, because the work that I've done on acquired brain injuries would suggest that sometimes people are actually presenting with a brain injury rather than with a psychiatric condition. And that's one of the areas where I think we need to be much more intelligent about how we get data that informs our research. My honourable friend for Esher and Walton, it's great, isn't it? Incidentally, I will in one moment. It's such a delight to go, well, it says Esher and Walton, that must be a Conservative Member of Parliament. No, it's not. I give way to my honourable friend. Yes, I know.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And just to say that in my constituency and across my area of Fife, we have a real problem with violence and aggression in schools. Every week for the last month, there's a violent attack, children on children, and almost every occasion it is filmed and shared on social media and amplified. And I wonder if he agrees with me, therefore, that it's a real reason why we need action.
She makes an extremely good point, and the use of a mobile phone as another form of aggression is a very disturbing part of the trend that we've seen. And indeed, she's quite right that we need to consider action in that field. The point I was going to make about the member for Esher and Walton was that she said the following words. She referred to services that are inherently addictive by design. Now, I think there's actually a contradiction in terms in there. They're not inherently addictive, they're addictive by design. I think those are two quite different things, and what we should strive to achieve is that that no services that are provided for children are addictive by design, and that's precisely one of the things that the government is determined about. I should say, incidentally, to the Right Honourable Member for North West Hampshire, I said earlier that I'd had no meetings, or I indicated by doing a zero with my fingers that I'd had no meetings with tech. That's not quite true. I had a meeting a few months ago with Baroness Jones with TikTok, though I have to say that I expressed as strongly as many members have in the debate here today, the kind of views that they have in relation to the operation of TikTok. But it's not that I've been convinced by TikTok. If anything, we were trying to put the argument to them about the need for responsible activity in this field, of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that clarification. In his negotiations with the member for Workington, he will have taken direction consulted with Number 10. One of the concerns is that, given that he's instituted an investigation into the impact of UK legislation on American tech firms, that President Trump might be upset if we were to take these kind of steps. How much of that has been a consideration in him effectively filleting this bill?
Yeah. He's beginning to subscribe to conspiracy theories. I've had no role in any negotiating with the honourable member, nor with Downing Street on these matters, and I haven't taken into consideration, I haven't taken into consideration anything in relation to what Donald Trump might or might think in this field. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend for Chipping Barton said that he's 32, which is obviously very difficult to believe. But he referred to smartphones in 2007, but 3G was launched in 2001. And I'm slightly conscious that when I was at school, the only thing that we were rowing about was whether we were allowed to take electronic calculators into O-level maths exams. So I sometimes feel a little kind of out of my depths with all these young expressions of interest. I bet you it's not a point of order.
It is a point of order. So,
point of order, Kit Malthouse.
Chair, I wonder if you could give us guidance as to whether we've actually got the correct minister responding to this bill. If there were negotiations, which there obviously were with the honourable gentleman about the bill, one would expect the Minister who'd conducted those negotiations and therefore was able to speak to the decisions that had been made to appear at the dispatch box. Have we got the right person?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order. However, that is not a matter for the Chair. It's entirely up to the Government which Minister they put up to speak. Minister.
I'm afraid you'll have to put up with me, Madam Deputy Speaker. The member, my honourable friend for Darlington, referred to the issue of the fear of missing out, and this is such a potent aspect of many young people's lives. I mean, it had its previous version before digital arrived, but it's so much more acute now, and it cuts in so many different ways at the same time. She also referred to Ellen Room and the issues in the data bill, which we'll be discussing in Bill Committee next Tuesday and next Thursday, and then back at report stage in the House in a few weeks' time, so I look forward to her contributions then. My honourable friend for North West Cambridgeshire, with whom I cannot compete for youth, but he made a very important point about, which I'm conscious of myself, which is that one of the positive effects that social media can introduce, which was not available to me when I was trying to work out whether I was a gay man at the age of 15 or 16, is that there is a diaspora. There are other worlds where there are people who are a bit more like me. And that is a releasing thing for many young people. So being able to kind of harness what is good in social media and lose what is bad is the key task for us. Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing could matter more than the mental, physical and spiritual health of our young people. There are many aspects to that health: addiction in its many forms, including alcohol, drugs, gambling and, I would argue, as many others have today, smartphone use. Harmful messages about body image, violent and risky sex, radicalisation, bullying, self-confidence and taking one's own life, all of these are part of that. Physical health is, of course, part of mental and spiritual health. Getting out and about, as many have referred to, eye-to-eye contact, brain development, all of these things matter. And let's be absolutely clear, excessive smartphone usage is engaged in all of these aspects of mental and spiritual and, I would argue, physical ill health. Algorithms can be set to increase addictive scrolling. Apps with weak age verification processes expose children to completely inappropriate material. The business model for some tech companies is not always conducive to children's health. We also have to consider the benefits of limited rather than excessive use of smartphones. A lot of modern life is, of course, accessed online, including homework. Social media can gather diaspora, but that too can be a minefield. If honourable members haven't seen the film Under the Volcano, which is a Polish film about a young Ukrainian family just at the point of the second invasion of Ukraine by Putin 3 years ago, stuck in Tenerife, they should watch it, because the children there are absolutely terrified of what social media are going to tell them about what's happening back at their own home. I'm also conscious that for some neurodiverse youngsters, social media is absolutely vital means of ensuring their health. We fully recognise the difficulties facing parents, teachers and youth workers, adjudicating rows, as has often been referred to, and of course teachers know that they're only part of a child's life for 20% of their time. So parents and the expectations and the social expectations on parents are just as important as anything else. And I fully recognise the complaint from many young people that I hear regularly in my own constituency: there's nothing else to do round here. 100 years ago, in every one of our constituencies, there would have been youth clubs, there would have been scouts and guides, there would have been lots of different organisations that specifically catered for young people to do active things out of the home. Many of those things barely exist today, and that's part of what we need to look at. Let me talk, Madam Deputy Speaker, specifically about what we will do and what we are doing. First of all, the Online Safety Act. It's called the Online Safety Act 2023. I only wish it had been the Online Safety Act 2020 or 2021 or 2022. It was far too delayed. It's extremely frustrating for us as ministers at the moment that this has taken so long to get to this point. We're working with Ofcom to implement every element of it as fast as we possibly can, but some elements of that are written into the Act itself. The Secretary of State wrote to Ofcom on the 16th of October last year to that effect, that we want to implement everything as fast as we possibly can, whilst taking on board the criticisms that some have made of Ofcom. We also believe, of course, the illegal content codes have now passed parliamentary scrutiny and they will come into force this month. I hope that that will produce some change. The draft children's safety codes, which have been referred to, are nearly finalised, and the child safety regime will be in effect by summer. That is good news. And of course, the Online Safety Act itself, in section 178, says that it must be reviewed. Also, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology has launched its own feasibility study, which is into the impact of smartphones and social media use. That will report in May of this year. It's been run by the University of Cambridge and a consortium of experts. And the bill, we hope, that has been published today by my honourable friend, will help us build on that feasibility study so that we have all the information that we need to make a considered view. We will work with this on this in roughly the same timetable as is provided in the bill today. And the closer we can get to causal and direct relationship between smartphone usage and mental health issues, and to clear evidence on the best, most effective and most appropriate and proportionate intervention by government, the better. Just in relation to the data bill, because there are further things that we're introducing there, there are new requirements on information society services which are likely to be accessed by children so that they can be protected and supported when they are designing their processing activities. Clause 91, Clause 124 and Clause 81, I think, will make a significant difference. The bill makes recommendations, Madam Deputy Speaker, which very much chime with what we intend to do and are helpful in that direction. Of course we want the Online Safety Act to bed in. Of course we want to implement the data bill and the new provisions there. Of course we want to conduct fuller, more authoritative research and provide clear advice to teachers and parents across the land. Of course this is not the end of the matter. I'd be amazed if there is not further legislation in this area in the coming years. And with that, I commend the campaigners who've made such a strong case to us and via my honourable friend. And I just end with the words from my honourable friend for Kensington and Bayswater. The words of the paediatrician that he referred to are ringing in my mind. There is no option of inaction for this House or for this country. There has to be action, and I'm grateful to the honourable member for introducing his bill today.
I beg to move that the debate be now adjourned.
The question is that the debate be now adjourned. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Debate to be resumed what day?
11th of July.
11th of July. I'll now give a few moments for the front benches to swap over.